it's quite a wide-ranging report, and we'll try after this meeting to find a resolution for that. Sibs, you were going to declare an interest as well?
Yes, although there's no bearing into the agenda of today, I'm employed by Black Southwest Network.
Thank you very much. Right, now we've got the minutes of the last meeting that took place when I find them on 22nd of November. I have been through them. Does anyone have any points of accuracy they wish to raise first? No? I only noticed this last night, so apologies for this. There were a couple of actions in the minutes that we were going to be updated by officers. This was as a result of the long discussion we had about Christina's nighttime economy report about the support that's available for council staff, for our staff who work in antisocial hours. Don't think we've had that yet, so if we can reflect that in these minutes and see if we can get that from Steph or somebody else in the HR team. And we also requested a briefing on the tobacco and vapes bill as it progresses. Well, it's still progressing. I've had verbal updates and conversations, but at some point we will get a full briefing on what the impact of that bill as it continues its journey to enact will have upon us, because it's important for this committee, and it also has licensing implications for the council as well. So that will be coming. So subject to that, I'd like to move that these minutes are a true reflection of our last meeting. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Emily. So we're in favour of adopting those minutes as a record of our last meeting? Yes? Thank you very much. Right, agenda item 5, Chair's announcements. I don't normally say very much in this time slot. I just will say something briefly about the budget process, because obviously that is in the news, and the business of this committee is in the news because of it as well. The process that we're in so far is that officers have developed a wide range of savings options for committee chairs to look at. We've given feedback and ratings, and formal ratings in some cases, to those savings. They've then been discussed in detail by the Finance Subcommittee, which Councillor Malik chairs. Public meetings of that Finance Subcommittee were held on Wednesday and Thursday this week, and I had my session answering questions from members of that committee on Wednesday. It's important to stress that the proposals that have been published for that committee are just that. They are options and proposals. They're not decisions. Finance Subcommittee doesn't make decisions either. It's just a forum for those proposals to be discussed. It'll be Strategy and Resources at its next committee that actually makes a decision about the budget allocation to this committee. Rather like central government, none of the government departments decide their own budget. The Treasury does. Strategy and Resources Committee is effectively our Treasury inside the Council, and they will be deciding what our budget will be. And so while there are hot topics of interest within that, it's not a decision for me, because I'm not a member of Strategy and Resources, and it's not a decision for us either. And that's the way the system works. So I just wanted to put that on the record. Right, agenda item 6 is public forum. We've actually, compared to most of our meetings, we've actually got a very light forum today. Questions were submitted, and the answers, they were from Sarah Freeman about allotments engagement, and the officer's answers have now been published for us, although Sarah has indicated she's not here to ask supplementaries. She was basically asking about what is the timetable for our engagement with allotment holders. If you remember, back on October the 11th, we made a decision about allotment rents that will enable us to employ a new officer at some point in the next financial year, and we'll be able to start on a phased process the engagement with allotment holders on what the future structure of the rental system will be and a review of the service. But we're not ready to start that yet, and that was made clear on October the 11th. So just putting that on the record. That's what I would have said if she had come along. So we've got one statement, and it's from Mr. Gary Hopkins, who I see is with us. Gary, you know the drill very, very well. We've all got your statements. You don't have to read it out, but if you want to summarise it for us, you're very welcome to do so.
Yes, certainly. Some years ago, the Springfield allotment site was actually looked after by No West Health Association for 10 years, and they did quite a reasonable job, and it became a very useful site for the potential growing of vegetables for the community. After some while, the allotments officers failed to take any action, and eventually got together and decided there was going to be a competitive process to see who took over. There was a group of women from Knoll Ward, and this is in Knoll Ward rather than Fulwood, who ironically known as the Bristol Greens, who put forward a very strong case why they should have actually had that site. And they had experience in all the right areas. Unfortunately, officers decided to hand the site with a detailed lease to Rework, which is an organisation based in Fulwood Broadway, or rather was. There was lots of warnings given at the time to the officers that this would lead to disaster because of the plan that this could not work, but they failed to listen. And then the site fell into disrepair and disuse. Eventually, some different use was found. But in fact, now we know that Rework went into administration. It had been a receipt of a sizable amount of public money, one way or another, and had not put aside even enough money to pay redundancy to the local staff who were got rid of. Now, this is a failure from community development and a failure from the No West Alliance, which actually does a good job in some ways, but thinks it knows everything about everything and doesn't. I'm speaking on behalf of the Newquay Road Partnership, which represents, from a wide range of agencies, the area of No West that's probably the most troubled, Newquay Road and Ilminster Avenue, which has had recent threats and problems. I want this committee to look at what happened with that tender process, what happened with the public money that went into Rework, and re-examine why, when the original tenderer from Bristol Greens wrote to actually say that she was interested in taking back over the site now that Rework had gone out of business, she was just dismissed and pushed to one side, and the original people who made the original mess-ups were allowed to just dictate what happened in the future. So we need an inquiry.
Okay, thank you, Gary. There's no further comment or interaction on the statements, but you will have noted that we've made a note of what you said, and the relevant officers are actually in the room for other business this morning. I'm sure they will have noted what you said too. And I suggest if you perhaps email me and copy in the chief officer, then we'll try and get a reply to you. Okay. If we go on to agenda item 7, which is our regular financial report, and this is for period 8 of the current financial year. I made my comments in Chair's remarks about the budget process. All I'll say about this report is just to draw people's attention again that we are actually quite a high spending, high impact committee. We spend roughly £96 million on behalf of the people of Bristol, but our call on the general fund is only just under 15 million, which is the area that the Finance Subcommittee and Strategy and Resources are looking at for savings. But we do a lot of good work right across the city, which is reflected in the various tables and the appendix in the report. But we've got Carol and John to introduce this for us. So, Carol, if you want to go first on the public health side of the report.
Thank you, Chair. So John and I are here to present the 24-25 quarter 3 period 8 a budget report for your information. In your pack, you've got the summary paper and the appendix for the committee to note. And the report covers, as the Chair mentioned, the General Fund, the Public Health Grant and capital programmes financial position to the end of period 8, that is November 2024. So the budget includes a total general fund of £14.9 million, of which £6.4 million is communities and public health and £8.5 million is management of place. The general fund currently has a small underspend of £0.1 million, so about 140k, and the public health grant, which is awarded by the Department of Health and Social Care, which totals £36.4 million, so is the vast majority of our public health spending. Oh, sorry. Can you not hear me very well? I do beg your pardon. Let me move this a bit further. Oh, it's going really well there as well. Please don't make me repeat all of that. General summary.
I thought it was excellent.
The general fund, small underspend of 0.1 million, so about 140,000, and the public health grant, which is awarded by the Department of Health and Social Care, totals £36.4 million, and so that's the vast majority of our public health funding, and that currently has a nil variance. Our capital programme also is reporting a nil variance, so not much change from the last quarter, and so overall we're reporting a balanced budget. So I don't know if my colleague John has anything to add.
I don't, Carol. I think you covered both of them very well. So, yeah, as I say, the forecast for P8 is a balanced budget from the growth and regeneration elements as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Before I ask for any questions, just on it's page 19, the note under table 2 of our report, this is something we got changed last time, but it's reverted to what I suspect is an earlier version of a committee report 3 meetings back. We have 26 libraries in Bristol after the Lockleys Library moved to become an access point, and we've got 434 parks and green spaces across the city. So that appeared last time, but it's disappeared again this time. So if we could insert that back in, again, so we just understand the scale of what we're doing and where we're spending the money. The variances and undelivered savings, John, do you want to say something about those? These are the forecast of undelivered savings. This is part of the budget pressures we've got this year, which is on page 21 of our pack.
I mean, thank you, Chair. All I would say really is, as you can see, there's quite a detailed list of savings there, broken down into various different categories. Symptomatic of the process we go to, at the start of the year, about the time we're doing now for next year, to identify any possible savings we can deliver. Some of those, particularly those relating to catering in those areas, in part because of the move to bring the catering for the organisation into a single contract and some delays in the contract of that. A number of those haven't delivered. There's some challenges elsewhere, but others have over-delivered. So I have to say, overall, we are still expecting, as you said, to meet our budget, which I think is probably the key thing. So I'm not unduly worried about that. I think we will continue to strive to deliver savings everywhere we can. Sometimes we're able to deliver those, sometimes we aren't. We will, obviously forecast them and review them as we go through the year, as we're setting them for this year as well.
Yeah, so of the 152, we've addressed the £55,000 saving that was not delivered, isn't being delivered this year and wasn't delivered last year either. But the other two, which are on catering, I'm guessing it's unlikely that we're going to deliver them this year.
Within this year, but they are going to come out of this part of the GNR budget. Happily for me, it's still another part of my overall budget, but so it won't be an issue for this committee going forward.
Right. Any other members with questions? Emily, and then Ed, and Abdul.
Yeah, thanks. Obviously, I guess this is all in context of budget season, but I do just want to make a point. I think because I think this is the only chance that I will have to make it before we see kind of final proposals about domestic abuse, because obviously I think this shows an underspend over the past year, slight underspend, and we've obviously seen that there is a proposed cut to the domestic abuse funding from the general fund. My understanding is that it means that there's no change next year because of the saving. But I guess my concerns are just, we kind of know when money goes, we're not going to get it back, or it's unlikely that we'll get it back. So I just want to make the point that we are very concerned about it. And also just to flag, obviously, with the Silver motion, the council unanimously agreed to make prevention of domestic abuse and sexual violence a priority. And the council obviously has, or is really trying to focus on prevention at the moment, because we know it like saves lives and also money in the long run. So I think we do have concerns about it. And I guess, Stephen, I just want to say to you, can you kind of make that point when you are in discussions? And I guess in terms of the actual saving, like, we know that there are so many things that could be like done more in order to prevent domestic abuse and sexual violence, and also that the services are so stretched. Like, when you talk to people delivering the services, it's so hard out there. So yeah, I guess it's a point, not a question.
And that's fine, Emily, and I hear you. The 140,000 that is in the papers that went to Abdul's finance committee, 100,000 of that is for a project that has ended, which Carol can say a little bit more about, and the balancing 40,000 is for a current vacancy that the service feels that if it wasn't filled, they could still manage and offer the service without any detriment. But Carol, do you want to address that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, and completely get it, absolutely, as someone who, this is very close to us. Just to put a bit of context in, first of all, in terms of the current funding that we have for domestic abuse and sexual violence for Bristol, it's £2.5 million. So 1.4 million of that is a combination of, and the smallest part of that is the general fund, and the largest part of that is actually public health grant. So we're really committed to domestic abuse in Bristol. And on top of that, we've then got just over £1 million of Domestic Abuse Act funding as well. So the total of that is £2.5 million. So we probably invest more in Bristol than most other councils, I would say, given that it's not nationally a mandated service. So we do take it very seriously indeed. And it's absolutely been a priority of the council for a number of years. So having said that, in terms of this specific pot, as the chair referenced, £100,000 of that was a time-limited project which was jointly funded with Children's, which has come to an end. So that's an unallocated pot, and then the £40,000 is a commissioning post, which we're covering in other ways. So because of the financial position overall for the council, we've had to look really hard at what we could possibly do in really difficult circumstances. Of course, this wouldn't be absolutely our first choice, but actually we're really limited in what we can do. So that's where it's come from, but completely accept. The other thing I should say, the bit of good news we do have is that because a lot of our grants are year on year, and we have had recent confirmation that all of our grants are going to be funded for this year, and in some cases there's going to be a small uplift as well. So in an environment where a lot of people aren't getting funding, domestic abuse actually is getting it. So just to give you a bit more context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I think some of the funding into this area comes via the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner as well. I know she was lobbying hard, because I met her about this, the government, to make sure that funding was continued beyond 1st of April, because there was uncertainty about it. So that's something else we might want to explore.
It has.
Does you have an answer?
It's one of the five that have been. We've got confirmation that are going to be funded. So
right.
That's very good news.
Good. Next was Ed.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, so I'm okay just to ask them in turn. Okay, so first, these all relate to Section B, risks and opportunity, which is available from page 24 to 26 in the pack. So the third risk listed on there is just described as ongoing parks, other service pressures, and then with a financial amount given. A bit of feedback generally is that feels incredibly vague. I wonder if someone could just tell us a little bit more about what those other service pressures are, just for clarification, please.
This is for you, John.
Yeah, sorry. Do you mind just repeating that? Sorry.
Okay, so in the risk and opportunity section, so that's section B of this report, page 24, the third risk says ongoing parks other service pressures, with the net risk given at £239,000. Could you explain what those other service pressures are?
I'm afraid I can't, Councillor. I'm just looking over to my right. Can we come back to you on that?
Okay, yeah, if we can come back to the end of the last time, because I don't think it's sufficient to say other service pressures and not give a little bit of detail, at least as to what they are, considering the amount of money involved.
Ed, I'm trying to find what you're referring to, because I think we've got different page numbers. Which this is in section B.
Okay, section B, risks and opportunities.
And which
It's the third risk listed.
ongoing parks and other service pressures, 319,000 risk, 239 net.
Yes.
Yeah, right, just so.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Note's the right place that you're questioning.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so my next question concerns two of the risk items. It concerns two of the risk items which were additional income targets. So one for cemeteries and crematoriums, and one for parks, following an Ernst & Young report delivered to the former cabinet in December 2023. Could I just ask, just for the record, who it was that commissioned the Ernst & Young report back in 2023?
It was corporately commissioned, Councillor. Sorry, that sounds vague, but it was some work that we did jointly with finance colleagues. So I think it was finance who actually asked Ernst & Young to look at this. It was a council-wide piece of work, and it was looking at income in general and trying to make sure that income was keeping pace with inflation.
Okay, thank you. And further to that, can I ask if you personally thought that the two targets referenced in here, so the one to do with additional income for parks and additional income for cemeteries and crematoria?
I think it's fair to say that we had some concerns about it from the service point of view. Councillor, yes, I think that's fair. I mean, what I would say is that...
It's longer than normal.
That was quite a long one.
Thank you. So what that process threw up is that the better approach to looking at fees and charges across the council was to be much more bottom-up. So I think it was a welcome challenge from finance colleagues that we should be looking at this across the area. Those of you who know the director of the service will not be surprised to know that this is something she's been looking at very closely anyway. And I think it's, what we've done now is much more a service-by-service level approach to what the appropriate inflation level is. So it was always going to be challenging, and we've struggled to deliver them. So, we did have some concerns. What I would say is, as well, as part of the budget process setting going forward for next year, we've reset this, and we're looking at a more realistic approach.
It's good to hear that we're looking at a more realistic approach in the current budget. Thank you. So finally on that, did you feel that there was a pressure in order to accept those targets just in order to make the numbers add up in the previous budget?
That might not be a fair question for an officer to answer.
I don't mind answering that. So, I mean, there's pressures on our budgets all the time, Councillor. We have to look at it across the area. We were challenged to, and it's not just for this service, it was for all the GNR services. We were challenged to make sure that we were utilising...
for this one, because it is, in pure financial terms, it is a very significant item on the list. No, it's not something we've discussed previously.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. Yeah, no, that's it's with public health in terms of the contract. Having said that, the £4 million that's referred to is the general fund contribution to a much larger sum of money. So the capital spend on that is the capital that you're talking about, isn't it?
No, I'm still in section B. It's the final item of section B. It's the risk of a £395,000 pressure.
I do beg your pardon, there's two sets of Hengrows, so it makes it really confusing. But it's in terms of that, although it's actually a corporate risk rather than a public health risk for that one. It's it's a known risk to the council. It's increased because of utility costs over the last year. So, and so the risk is being managed corporately rather than directly with public health. It's a shame that our finance person isn't here, unfortunately, so they aren't able to give you more of the detail because, as I say, it's being managed corporately rather than with public health.
Okay, if I could request some more detail on that in writing, that would be very
Of
helpful
course.
following the meeting.
Yeah, we'll
Happy
get
to.
we'll get Ben, our finance officer in this area, to drop the committee a note, and indeed about any other outstanding questions from your questions. Right, Abdul, next.
I'll reserve my remarks. I think we've had sufficient
Okay.
talk.
Right, are there any other questions on the finance reports? Sibs?
Thanks. Looking at the previous, let me just go back to the appendix, the background document, page 300, page 33 to page 334. One of the ways that the park services seems to have been supported was through the allocation of unallocated strategic community infrastructure levy through SIL receipts to a total of 1.8 million on the basis of supporting the refurbishment of children play areas and equipment. Now, again, just going back to what my co-councillor there has said, is that it looks as if most of the risk is coming from parks. So even going to our next agenda item, we are supporting a subsidiary of parks. So exactly what is the challenges that parks is facing from a financial understanding? Because some of the risks or some of the opportunities of savings also relate to services around parks. So can we get a bit more insight into the issues that actually parks is facing?
Well, we spend about 15 million on parks and estates and bring-in income, large part of which is from cemeteries and crematorium, but also Blaze Nursery, which we're coming on to next, of 13 million. So there's a 2 million difference. And one of the things I'm keen, and officers know this, is that over the next year we look at more opportunities for bringing in more income, so the park service perhaps is able to break even. And when we had our policy workshop on December the 3rd, first week of December anyway, whenever it was, that was one of the bids for a working group of the committee that Ed in particular was keen on, and we are going to be doing that later this year. But John or Richard Fletcher, do you want to add to that?
I'm very happy, Councillor, just to give us an overview of some of the challenges. So it has been a very challenging area financially and faced lots of challenges and pressures. I'm sure Richard will vouch. What we have done as part of the budget build process this year is work sort of line by line with finance around the pressures on each service area and on the potential income and therefore savings that can link to that. So I have to say that's been a really helpful process for parks, as it has for other areas of GNR. So I'm very confident that going forward, we've got things much more in a balanced position, and that, you know, we will still undoubtedly have pressures and challenges as we go forward. And, you know, where we can utilise other types of funding, you know, strategic SIL that you, community infrastructure levy, apologies, that you referred to, which was something that was agreed at full council as an appropriate allocation of strategic community infrastructure levy to support parks and green spaces. We'll obviously look to do that as well. But that would be my sense, that strategically I'm much more confident going forward for next year around that than we have been historically. I don't know, Richard, is there anything you want to add, service point of view?
You got another point?
So what are the current options around using strategic SIL and the unallocated SIL for balancing certain parts of the budget within this committee? Is that been a suggestion? Is that a proposal? Is that something that you're kind of thinking in ways of not balancing because you're really well balanced, but in terms of overcompensating for where you may see gaps?
I don't think we're looking at any further allocations at the moment from strategic SIL, but I mean, it's something we'd always, the criteria for strategic community infrastructure levy are set. It needs to be linked to areas of growth and regeneration, needs to meet various other criteria. But where there are opportunities and there's available strategic community infrastructure levy, we can always look at that. But I don't think we've got any proposals at the moment, have we? Or have we?
Excuse me. We've had over two budgets allocations of £3.5 million of strategic SIL towards parks improvements, agreed by first Cabinet and then committee. So we're in the process of delivering that at the moment. As John says, that we're always looking for other ways that we might be able to make a case for SSIL and spending it in parks, but it's definitely the key way, I think, alongside area committee allocations of devolved SIL, that we maintain our most important infrastructure across the city.
And it's also fair to say with a lot of development scheduled for the city centre in particular, we're looking for development gain, whether it's Section 106 or strategic SIL for Castle Park in particular. I want to make a brief comment about that, which may address your point, as it's your ward.
So the we know that the site Castle Park needs a lot of work, and it's been a key component of the city centre design and development plan. So a subsection of that. So we're taking forward, or the regeneration team at the moment is taking forward a further design proposals for Castle Park. It's quite a high number that's been attached potentially to the need to redesign Castle Park, so I'm sure it'll be done in phases, but we'll be looking for a strategic SIL going forward to be allocated to that.
Thanks for that. In terms of that unallocated strategic SIL and the implementation of that, it's kind of raised some concerns, especially in how it's been delivered in Redcliffe, where it's within council estate, but you could see that there hasn't been really good communication amongst the estate team in order to be able to add on that budget from the HRA spend, and also there hasn't been a bit of connectivity with maybe potential grants that could be received from Sports England in terms of updating some multi-play areas. So in terms of parks and a reassurance, is Park working strategically to actually bring external income, either from grants or elsewhere, to better deliver on parks services as a whole, A, and B, how is Parks working with other teams to make sure that it's not utilizing its own spend, but is actually collaborating across other teams to make sure that we're doing the one thing all together with maximum budget as opposed to its own budget, because then that reduces the quality of what it could deliver, which is what we are seeing in some of the parks that have been delivered through that unallocated SIL.
Yeah, Richard, and the business improvement districts potentially have money to spend in this area as well, because I met with the city centre, the Redcliffe one, about that recently.
I think you may be referencing a programme that was delivered recently to improve play areas across housing estates in the city, which was funded through housing but delivered by project officers in the Parks Service. So that was actually a good example of some really good collaboration between housing and parks in terms of where are the best places to invest in, where is it going to have the most impact in terms of new facilities when you compare housing facilities alongside facilities that are in general parks and green spaces and therefore affording general access. We were able to share or provide information about what different types of play infrastructure there is right across the city, because we have quite detailed knowledge and information about that. And all of that information went into the design and location ideas for that investment, which is good. In terms of external grants, we do look for opportunities for external funding. I think external grant funding for capital investment, like things like children's play, is actually quite hard to get at the moment. There were times in the past when it was much easier, but that's quite difficult. and does therefore tend to make us lean towards things like strategic SIL to make up the difference and to keep up on our play infrastructure needs. But we have managed to get other funding, certainly to deliver projects related to nature, for example. So we have our Green Recovery Fund funded project going forward at the moment, which is a £1.2 million project delivered over the next 2 years to invest in green spaces to improve for nature. We're spending a £300,000 grant this year and have done in previous years to help with our tree planting programme. So where there opportunities exist, we do go for them. There's a Nature Towns and Cities opportunity which has just come forward, and we've been working with colleagues across the service, in the Environment and Sustainability Service, to put together a bid for Nature Towns and Cities, which is another £1 million. We don't have feedback on that yet, but it is due this month as to whether we're going to be invited to go ahead and put a full application in. So we are on the move, as it were, and we are quite reasonably successful at getting grant funds in, but there aren't a huge amount of external grant funds around.
Yeah, some of that Green Recovery Fund came via WECA, and that's going to help us to deliver 30% of the council's land being delivered for the benefits of nature, and there are other lottery bids that we are contemplating at the moment. Yesterday, in the fog and mist, in freezing cold, I wandered around Stoke Park with several officers looking at opportunities for Heritage Lottery Fund bid for that as well, but that's at very early stages. So I am very keen that we rattle as many funding cages as we can, both in the public sector and elsewhere, to get more money in for our park service, but I also want to see more commercial opportunities being exploited. But is that okay, Sibs? Yeah, thank you very much. If there are no further questions, Carol.
Just a quick question to Carol. You mentioned earlier on that there might be opportunities for an uplift in different areas regarding funding. And given the comments that my colleague has made about domestic violence and abuse, I wonder how those areas are going to be chosen and whether there's an opportunity for us to propose the areas that receive the uplift.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. The way the grants work is that they provide a specific amount of money, and they are very specific about how that money gets spent. So if they say we are providing a grant for a specific area of work, they may or may not attach an uplift to that. So we don't have any flexibility around that, I'm afraid. So what we do with our contracting is look at how we spend our money wisely to make sure that we can, wherever we can, we accommodate that uplift. So that's how we manage primarily our public health grant, actually, because that's the pot that funds the majority of our contracts and therefore the majority of our services.
Okay, right. In that case, I'm going to move that we have noted the report in front of us and the general fund forecast outturn revenue position of a balanced position with just a £0.1 million underspend in comparison to budget at Q3 period 8, 2024-2025, the current year. And there is a break-even position on the public health grant as shown in Appendix A1, and the broadly balanced position with no variance to budget for the capital programme. So that's just for noting. I don't need a seconder for noting to it. Right. Okay, if we move on in that case to Blaze Nursery, so we can have a changing of the guard at the top table, and Richard and Greg can come forward. Come back later. Okay, Richard, I think most people know you, but Greg hasn't appeared before the committee before. Can you just briefly explain who you are and what you do?
Yeah, certainly. I'm Greg Want. I'm the Commercial Development Manager in Parks. My role is supporting the commercial team in bringing more income in, whether that be with businesses like Blaze Nursery, or also bringing in new income into Parks, whether that linking with private companies to come and do new innovative commercial things within Parks.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So I'm here today to seek committee approval. Oh, sorry.
I'll go first.
Zumping you.
Yes, so this is agenda item 8 on Blaze Nursery. So we've got Richard and Greg to speak to us about it and answer any questions. We've got Richard and Greg to answer any questions about Blaze Nursery. I went on a very interesting visit there, and it does do an excellent job for the council itself, which we, in other seasons of the year, notice right in front of the building with the flower arrangements on College Green on our ramp railings, but also provide exemplary services to other councils around the country as well. They have a retail offer to the citizens of Bristol, so it's a very popular facility, and it also operates commercially with other business partners as well. And I asked recently for examples, and they really are a magnificent range, everything from Butlins Minehead to Highgrove. So right to the very top. But of course, the most prestigious contract it has is the West Beyond Trim flower pots. So there is a full range of services that they provide. They also do, and I know something, Sibs, that this interests you from having heard you speak about it before, they also do quite a lot of good social value as well, working with apprentices and with current prisoners at Ley Hill Open Prison, who I met on my visit. So it's a good all-round activity by the council. This report is a peculiarity, really. It's just asking us to authorise them to spend, to buy stock, so that they can continue to be successful. But Richard and Greg, if you want to do a professional introduction to the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. So, yes, we're here to seek approval to spend up to £4 million in the next 4 years for the supply of goods for sale at Blaze Plant Nursery, which I know you're all familiar with. So the spend is for cost of sales incurred only to generate income, to offset the costs and ensure a surplus for the council, and therefore is not an additional burden, and to seek approval to deliver this spend through an appropriate and compliant route to market. So as we all understand, Blaze Nursery is a business operating within the Parks Service. It generates a profit that is used to support wider parks and green space services, which are enjoyed by residents across the city. Our contract to procure goods for resale expires in October 2025. Our previous expenditure levels over the last 4 years total just short of £3 million. So our ask for £4 million is based on a 5% RPI uplift over the term of the contract, 4 years, and a 10% annual sales uplift projected, which mirrors performance in the previous 2 years. And our previous performance and our projected performance are set out in Appendix H of this report, which is on page 39, which I won't go into in detail, but you may have questions about. The nursery has been transformed over the last 6 to 8 years, I think it's fair to say. We have realised that there was a falling away of wholesale markets, which Stephen alluded to, and we have developed and grown a retail offer, made a shift to retail effectively, and that now counts for 60% of our income. So the contract will help us procure goods for resale largely to retail, but we've also begun to expand and think of other ways of generating income to keep the business sustainable, and gives us confidence for our 10% uplift projections. So we are going to do a minor investment, for example, soon, just to help us run workshops and training sessions, which we know will be popular, having done some taster sessions recently with others. We've got good links with communities. Our profile has been raised significantly through a community vegetable kind of support scheme which we started during COVID, have continued ever since. So definite benefits about apprenticeships, supporting prisoners leaving Leyhill with work experience. So the nursery not only brings in money for park services, but also has other benefits as well. So I'll go back to the Office of Recommendations. We're asking the committee to spend up to £4 million over the next 4 years for goods for resale. Authorise the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration in consultation with the Chair of the Public Health and Communities Committee to pursue an appropriate and compliant route to market for that procurement, for that contract, and authorise the Executive Director for Growth and Regen to invoke any subsequent extensions and variations specifically defined in the contract being awarded up to the maximum budget envelope outlined in the report.
Thanks, Richard. Yes, so this is a key decision because it involves expenditure of more than £500,000. Any questions or observations? Got Lisa and then Cara and then Emily.
Thanks very much for that presentation. I think this is a really excellent initiative that has sort of potential to do even more in the future, and I think it really demonstrates how utilising opportunities to generate revenue to make us more sustainable in the long term has real benefits to us as a council over short-term cutting of things. You mentioned the vegetable scheme. Thinking about sort of our ambitions as a city for food growing, are there opportunities to expand more into that area around food growing? And are there any opportunities in other areas of the city to do something similar to the Blaze Nursery?
Is the latter question in terms of wider commercial opportunities or related to the nursery itself? Yeah, that's
wider commercial.
As I mentioned, we are going to do a small investment on site at Blaze Nursery just to expand our facilities, or to improve our facilities so that we can hold training workshops for food growing. We know that obviously we've got links into allotments and food growing stakeholders right across the city, so we realise there's a potential growth there. And through some of the conversations we've had and the taster sessions we've had with things like wreath making over Christmas, we know there's a market there, so which we want to expand into. That's such a small area of expansion that we're looking at now and we're going to take forward. In terms of wider commercial, we have had in the past consultants come to look at what we do and the quality of our green spaces across the city. There are definitely opportunities. I think it is the case that those opportunities, in order to come to realise, need investment quite often, capital investment. So that is something which the council would need to have to consider if it was going to grow more businesses. The offer we've got, the Treetops offer at Ashton Court, for example, was something where we've got somebody in on a commercial basis giving something which the public want to use and is popular and is making an income for the council. So those are the sorts of things that we need to find more of. Greg, anything you want to add to that?
Not sure, but John.
Director Smith is waving at me, so I think he wants to say something.
Thank you, Chair. Well, just to add a couple of thoughts from me. So, you know, in parks or other GNR areas or other areas of the council, I think it's fair to say we'd always be happy to look at opportunities. I think that has to be balanced with, have we as the council got the expertise, or, you know, and what risks we might be taking in trying to set up a venture, obviously. As the Chair has indicated, I think anyone who visits Blaze Nursery comes away with a real feeling of belief and confidence in the team there. You know, the head of the Blaze Nursery, Rod, is quite an inspirational character, and he knows his business. And for that reason, Councillor, we're very happy to back them with this. And you know, there is some risk associated, but we think it's a balanced and appropriate one. But generally, we are cautious of the council getting into areas that we don't, you know, that isn't our core business, we don't feel understand. But the examples that Richard gave, we're very supportive of, and we'd always consider things, but that's the balance we're always having to look at.
My question was actually pretty much the same as Lisa's, which was given there are so many benefits. It's great, and it would be great to have more of these. And also just to note the commitment to environment, sustainability, and going peat-free at Blaze, which I think is really laudable and to be encouraged.
Okay, I've got Emily and then Abdul.
Yeah, I feel like Kara's already just mentioned it, but I was just thinking from an environmental sustainability perspective, is there any more that could be done, or what's happening? Yeah, there.
I can speak on this a bit more. So the nursery, we have solar panels, so all the power there is run by solar. We don't rely on the grid at all. We have a borehole to draw up the water for all the watering we do on site for it. For peat-free, we've been growing in peat-free completely for the last 3 years and been doing it for the last 20 years, kind of mixing different side of it. We've gone 100% this year when we open back up in March. We're not going to have any peat-free, any peat in the compost that we sell on site. So we're really driving forward that side of it. We recycle all the pots that people buy from us to come back. They can come in and recycle them with us going forward. And we always are open to more ideas that we can do to kind of drive that.
That I want to mention, so I'm not sure if I go through each one and then ask for a response, but basically it's about the outreach of this project. Are there plans to maybe increase the outreach to more diverse communities, especially within my ward and maybe neighbouring Easton and Lawrence Hill? Is there an opportunity maybe to collaborate with local community groups and religious organisations from deprived areas? And maybe is there an opportunity to talk to schools within those wards to inspire the younger generation to come forward with similar projects and to learn similar things?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. I think we're not straying into, but obviously the council adopted a Parks and Green Spaces strategy which had a food growing allotment strategy alongside. So on our allotments and food growing side, we are going to grow that team with the expectation that we do more with communities about community growing and encouraging community growing. So the reason I'm going into that in terms of potentially running training workshops and getting people involved in community growing, it's our allotments service as well as our nursery service which is going to be involved in that. So that's definitely an area of direction for us. The capital investment that this committee approved for allotments will expand our collective growing opportunities. So we'll be looking for new audiences in new parts of the city to encourage into collective growing. In terms of Blaze Nursery, the skills about growing and expertise are there. I don't think there's any problem in us doing kind of outreach and taking those skills out into the community as well as having workshops and sessions at the nursery itself. So it's a very good idea and happy to take any proposals or opportunities from members.
Yeah, so just to finish off that point, that I think it's quite important. It's £4 million over a few years, and I think that it would be good to engage with those communities, and I'd be willing to assist. But also, I think it might be important, as far as the strategy is concerned, to include those economic quality impact assessments. It doesn't say anything about that, obviously, on this particular scheme, but in the future we need to bring something that is inclusive. Thank you.
This is an innocent question that may come from a position of ignorance. It's been a while since I visited your mosque or another one. Do mosques have flowers?
So for years we've been trying to grow a green roof, and this is one of the reasons why I was quite passionate about this. And we've struggled to find the expertise and assistance to have a green roof that was proposed in the original planning application, and it's a huge space. It would be really good to partner with someone, and I'm sure mosques across the city, but also churches and gurdwaras and other places have got green spaces and would like some inspiration and help. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Carol and then Ed and then Sibs.
Just another innocent question. I note that you say that you work with Lay Hill Prison for men. I'm just wondering if you also work with Eastwoods Prison for women.
Yeah, it's not something we do, but we're definitely open to the opportunity of doing it. And I'll make a note to speak with Rod, the nursery manager, to see how we can link up with that.
Thank you very much. So firstly, I just want to add my voice to the chorus of people here celebrating that we're going peat-free, and just offer my congratulations to Rod Pooley and his team. He might be one of my favourite officers in the council, notwithstanding my own partner. They've been absolutely fantastic to see that work that's come over a very long period of time. I had two questions. Firstly, just it'd be good to understand what the main drivers were for the increase in sales in 23-24, because that obviously must inform some projections going forward. And the other thing, it's, as I understand it from this report, it's fair to say that the demand to sell products to other local authorities is shrinking because of local authority budgets being throttled right across the UK. So I'd be interested to know what's being done to diversify our business-to-business customer base, for example, sales to private companies and third sector organisations, etc.
Yeah, I can speak on this. So last year, one of the big reasons we drove it forward is because we brought in a cafe at the end of the year beforehand, so kind of had a bit more of a longer stay part of it, and that really helped with people being there for a longer time. And with retail, the longer you stay in somewhere, the more likely you spend more money towards it. Also, it's one of the strange things that happens, and it kind of comes on a bit of a drive forward for next year, but we're still getting the word out there that we're up there, and it kind of really kind of came forward. We've only been really doing the retail offering for the 10 months we do it for now, for about 3 years now, so it's really still building that customer base going forward, and we're hoping to keep that growth going forward this year and also next year as well. And part of the piece of doing the workshops is building that portfolio of the nursery to kind of develop it going forward, and we'll be doing marketing around that as well to try and drive that forward. In terms of the other question, which was, sorry, did you remind me what the other question was?
It was around what's being done to diversify our B2B customer base, given the local authority sales could be on decline.
The horticultural industry of growing is a bit of a strange one at the moment, and Rod tells me this all the time, because of the move for breadth that's hit, with all the stuff that's been grown was generally grown over in Europe, so it's kind of been a real build up to internally within the country growing our own stuff again. One of the changes from that, all the big kind of garden centre groups are buying up small nurseries to grow themselves in, so there's a lot of kind of shorting the supply chain within the industry, so it's kind of a bit of a struggle at the moment to get out there to do it. We do try where we can, as the chair said earlier, we do Butlins, we've been doing for many years. We're trying to kind of grow that side of it, but really the main aim and the focus kind of going forward has been that retail side of it. To be open, the margins are better in the retail sector, so it's kind of, that's where we push down energy towards growing it going forward.
And it's worth saying, because you made the point, Ed, about other councils being in Parlour's financial straits, because I asked this question as well when this originally, to make sure that the business is diversified. Sibs, I think you indicated?
Thank you. It's really good to see the success of this business model, and it's great to see that some of those still internal subsidiaries seem to be doing well. I think in housing, we're previously discussing the door and window manufacturer within the council, mainly doors, fire doors, and that's also got a good growth trajectory. So it's really good to see that this initiative is also taking place. One of the things, though, that is quite similar with comments made from the Safe Fire Doors team and yourself is around this, I'd say, a little bit of an intangible social impact, and my co-councillor kind of alluded to that, is that I think we have such great levers of being able to make that better and be able to sing a unified song about what is our really clear, measurable social impact, and especially seeing that this sits within public health. I think it's not just about saying you're working with Leyhill, it's to really explain and provide clear detail of how many people you've engaged from Leyhill. It's not to say that you're working with schools, it's to really say the level of deprivation, where those schools are coming from, so that we can really be clear who is actually benefiting from the service that is being provided. I think the way that the soft impact is being described is not necessarily making it into a commercially viable, strong and tangible public good. However, the trading element is very strong, but the social element is not very strong. So looking at this, there isn't an impact assessment, and it's more on the reliance that when this goes to procurement, it will have one. However, at the budget spend of 4 million, I think, you've got a very strong 20% social value. So it'd be good to know did this go through procurement last time? And if it did that 20% of social value provide a clear framework of what good impact looks like? And can you speak on that basis in terms of the impact that's been made? Because that provides clear indicators based on the TOMS framework versus the ones mentioned here.
I certainly can't comment on the last contract that was let, I'm afraid. But the points being made are excellent. That we do need to be able to demonstrate that the nursery is, we believe it is having a social benefit, but where is it having it?
Yeah.
How great is it? How far do the ripples go? So I think we probably are a little bit short on some of that information. So we're definitely taking those points on board, and we'll improve that knowledge.
Okay. And I think looking at the growth trajectory, it's a really generous and moderate one at 10%. And I'm just thinking of, obviously, you've got a growing population, and in terms of that, you've also got a growing digital level of engagement. However, at the moment, it doesn't seem like the digital element is pretty strong. So how in terms of that 10% trajectory, is that just based on current operation and not growth of that model in terms of digital customer, different customer persona, so that trajectory could be a lot more? Now, I'm saying this on the basis that this is a subsidiary to Parks. So, what is that intangible benefit then for Parks based on that 10% trajectory? And if that trajectory had to go, what is that additional benefit to Parks? And is Parks really keen on seeing the growth of it? And if there is that ongoing growth, would we at some point then envision a spin-out that is a complete separate entity from Parks?
Yeah, I can talk about the kind of the growth and the projections that we made. We've gone very, I would say, kind of positively modest on the projections going forward. Really, obviously, our anticipation is to grow a lot more than that and kind of go further forward. But we didn't want to kind of make some out there suggestions that we could be doubling in that kind of time. It's given us a bit of headroom based on where we are now. Looking at the last few years, we've kind of looked at the growth we've got to get to this point and thought, okay, if we can maintain that, that's good. But like I said, really the big part about the retail side of it is the growing the profile that we've got up there. And although we're still getting comments every now and again of people saying that they didn't know we were here, that's slowing down. So it's kind of really, there's going to be a headroom at some point of where we hit, this is going to be our capacity max, and then going forward it's just then going to be price increases that potentially could change it. We'll still look for opportunities, but we're kind of anticipating that this growth is to a level unsustainable the way that we've seen it kind of skyrocket over the last 5 years. We're looking back for the retail sector. On that side of it, if it gets to a point that within the next 4 years we looked at for this request, we're going near that 4 million, we will obviously come back to committee to ask to extend it further. And at that point in time, we'll have a bit more of a look at the finances and show what benefits that's brought back into Parks has been the profit that come from it to kind of really drive forward that would meet our expectations and more. For that side of it, I think Rick's got the rest.
Yeah, I was just minded to think about some of the expansion proposals that we're looking at the moment. So I know Greg and team would like to try and set up an online shop, for example, which we don't currently have at the moment. We don't trade all year round, which is a product of our certificate of lawfulness. So that there are areas that we can look into to expand. I think, interestingly, the Community Growing Initiative created media attention, national media attention, which raised our profile, which means that we do get out there on social media. So that's definitely an area which will be growing. As Greg said, raising our profile is going to be key. We do have 5,500 friends of Blaze Nursery who are obviously keen to come and buy from us, and that demonstrates to some degree, you know, the loyalty that we might be able to generate for the nursery going forward. In terms of your question about whether this business would be lifted out of the park service and seen separately, I'm not sure I can answer that right now, I'm afraid, but we'll note it.
No, I think for now it's pretty integral to the park service, which is why it comes here. Otherwise, Stratching Resources will have their fingers all over it. I don't think we want that. Right, that was a very good discussion. I did wonder when this report came whether people would have any observations or not, but it was really good that people did. Let's go to the formal part. And I move that the Public Health and Communities Policy Committee authorises the spend of up to £4 million over the next 4 years for Blaze Plant Nursery supplies to allow the service to resell the supplies and be self-sustaining. Secondly, authorises the Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration, in consultation with me, to pursue an appropriate and compliant route to market for Blaze Plant Nursery supplies to accommodate a spend of up to £4 million over 4 years. And finally, authorises the Exec Director for Growth and Regeneration to invoke any subsequent extensions or variations specifically defined in the contracts being awarded up to a maximum budget envelope outlined in this report. So I'm moving that. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, happy to second.
Thank you. Emily, could everyone indicate those who are in favour of the recommendation? Well, that's unanimous, so thank you very much. And thank you to Richard and Greg. You can now return. And if I can ask Pete to join us at the front. Right, Pete, I think most of us have met you before, but you just want to quickly introduce yourself and your role.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Pete Franklin. I'm the Performance and Strategic Specialist. I work within the Resources Directorate, and I support Adult Social Care and the Resources Directorate itself in terms of everything performance and service planning related.
Thank you. Right, so this is one of our regular reports, just like the finance report. This one isn't monitoring the money, it's monitoring targets and actions. And I think it's worth me saying at this point that, of course, the targets, actions and performances that are being monitored here are from the current corporate plan that the council has that was developed by the previous mayoral administration. We're at early stages of developing the new corporate plan of the new administration and the new council that we're all members of, and I've had initial conversations with the policy team about that, but at the appropriate point, I'm sure there'll be opportunities for members to feed into that process. So Pete, do you want to introduce the report?
Happily.
And highlight the things that we need to look at?
Happily, except you stole the bulk of my thunder, so thank you. Yes, we will be developing the next corporate plan, and that's where all these measures and metrics come from that we're looking at today. So in terms of this report, we're looking at the second quarter, which is up to the 30th of September, progress against all those measures and metrics that are contained under the aegis of this committee. As the chair highlighted, there's different actions, different types of performance measures. There's the quarterly performance measures, which we'll have updates on, and also the outcome measures, which are slightly more glacial, the more annual measures. And the targets are set and agreed by councillors, and they, again, with the new plan, you'll be given that opportunity. So in terms of progress, am I showing anything, or who's showing what? In terms of progress, there is on the second page of the document a screenshot from the corporate dashboard. Now, I'm well aware that councillors like paper and do adoption, and it's great, but I would encourage you to actually have a look at that web link, because it does take you there. It's very intuitive. You can have a look, and if there's any queries or concerns, please do give me a shout. But as it stands, at Q2, 6 of the actions that are listed are all on target and on track. There's only one priority metric, and that one is also doing rather well. And with regards to the outcome measures, there are 10 of them, but they're all due to be reported later in the year. But what's really important, and you'll see on the appendix that we'll come to, we'll have a look at in a moment, is all of them have got good commentary to explain not just what's anticipated, but what we're doing to affect change. So I think it's a good opportunity to look at Appendix 2, A2. Literally, I don't know who's driving. Am I I'm not driving this, am I? No. Okay. So Appendix A2 lists all of the actions. What we've done is we've listed the actions at the start, and you can see the Q1 progress was green, and the Q2 progress is green, and some where it's been behind target, and then it's now on target. So you can see there's lots of green with the actions, and then when we drop down to the performance metric that we've got there, BPM 311, around maintaining community engagement, that's also on track and doing rather well. And again, the comments are there. The outcome measures, there's 5 of them are what have come from the Quality of Life survey, which we've got headline results for now, but not published in Q2. They'll be published in Q3. So the next report we bring you will have that and have all the officer management comments alongside that. But for now, this is what we're doing to affect change within the document. 2 of which, sadly, we're just waiting for the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities to actually provide data for around health longevity and healthy life expectancy. So again, we can't give you a number there, but what we can do is say what we're doing to try and make sure people have a healthier life. And then the very last one at the bottom is the last action that sits outside of the adult social care, communities and public health area, but actually comes under the aegis of this committee, which is around the ash dieback. And that one is behind schedule, and Chair has already indicated some information around the ash dieback, and I'm not sure I can add anything more to that. But if you have any questions, I'll be happy to either try and answer them now or take them away.
Thanks, Peter. A couple of things. You were referring to the screens. An officer is driving the screens for us, but I should have said at the start, we are actually being webcast today. It's the first time the committee's been webcast, and it's been a slightly sore point in between committees which are broadcast and which are not. This is the first time that we are actually being broadcast, so welcome to everyone who may be watching or may be watching later in the day. Peter, you just mentioned the ash dieback, which is one of the indicators where we are slightly behind where the corporate plan wanted us to be. Just to assure members of the committee that a lot of discussion has been taking place between myself, the Vice Chair has been involved in these as well, and officers about how we manage this disease, and a report will come to the committee when it's ready. But at the moment, where there is a danger to the public, for instance, if there is a diseased tree identified in one of our parks or along our highways, then action is already being taken. So just because we're not on track with a report to the committee, I wouldn't want anyone to think that proactive action isn't taking place around the city, because it is. And so some trees were pruned or felled along the Portway, for instance, earlier this month. Right, does anyone have any questions about this? Cara, then Lisa.
Thanks for the report, and overall it looks good to see so many green aspects on target. I just had a couple of questions. The first one is that the priority metric on levels of engagement with community development work is performing better than target at Q2 and better than this period last year. And I wondered if you were able to say what we're doing that's meaning we're meeting these targets better.
Penny, do you want to chime in with this one, please?
Hello, Penny German, Head of Service for Communities. It's a very difficult thing to kind of put a target to because, as you'll appreciate, community engagement has so many parameters and permeables. But we've had a bit of change in the team, and that probably reflects people's confidence and being, a bit more continuity in the team, as well as there being perhaps some opportunities that have enabled more engagement.
Thank you. And my other question was, I was interested in its point HCW3 on page 44. A network of community hubs is being funded through the UK Shared Protection Fund and Quartet, and I was just interested to know a bit more about those community hubs, what they're doing and how we as councillors can access them or how our residents can.
Thanks for the question. This goes back to, community hubs, first of all, aren't new. They're essentially all the kind of organisations that are at the heart of our communities. So South Mead Development Trust, Eastside Eastern Community Centre, St Bricks and St Anne's, those kinds of organisations. And during COVID, what was so clear to anyone that weren't aware was the essential importance of those neighbourhood organisations, but also organisations that organise around inequity, and the importance of those organisations acting as a hub in their communities. So we kind of gave this a name, Community Hubs. That was what came out of COVID, and we've built on that in the cost of living response, and we were able to access some funding from the UK Shared, it should be Prosperity Fund, sorry, and that's come via WECA. That funding actually ends. So what that funding is doing is just helping the capacity of those, that network of organisations. It's enabling them to work with us to think strategically about, the city as a whole and the community infrastructure that we need and that we need to build on.
Okay, thank you. Lisa.
Thank you. So my question relates to the outcome measure, reduce the percentage of people whose day-to-day life is affected by fear of crime. Given that we're currently getting that information from the Quality of Life Survey, and there is a proposal, I believe, to reduce the how often we conduct that survey to every 2 years, how will we gather that information, particularly from those communities across the city whose day-to-day fear of crime has probably really dramatically increased over the last year? Are there other ways we'll be able to gather that information? Because it feels like that's something we should be gathering yearly.
Yes, this is part of the cost savings that we're going through with the council at the moment. It's one of the proposals that the Quality of Life Survey to save money now happens once every other year. So to answer your question, it won't happen. It will be every other year that the survey will take place. And we have no mechanism to capture that.
So is through sort of going back to the community engagement part then that Cara was talking about, are there other ways that we can engage with communities so that we have a really good understanding of how those communities are perceiving crime and safety in the areas that they live?
I mean, we certainly have insight, and we're listening to people, and we have a kind of qualitative understanding. What we won't have is a measure.
This is a citywide measure, and we look at it not just across the city, but in areas of deprivation as well, so we can actually understand what that data is telling us. It's more than just a number. So sorry, it's just once every other year now.
Any other questions? Abdul?
Yeah, so I share the concerns because it seems that the measures are going to come from, especially, so if I talk to the one I'm really interested in is, if the health disparity in older men, especially if you're from a black and minority ethnic background and you're over 50, you're more likely to die, from cardiovascular disease, a stroke or something like that. And when you look at the kind of Q1, Q2, and it's not applicable here because we're still waiting for the information, as you've said, but to further kind of complicate things, if the quality of life data is going to be every two years now rather than annually, like we're not going to have the same quality of data that we need. And I suppose we need to be thinking about that, and maybe there's something else that we can do in terms of gathering data, because this is really important kind of information and performance indicators. And so I'm just wondering what the plan is and why we still haven't got this data and what we're doing about it.
I'm a data nerd, so I'm with you. But the budget has been, the quality of life survey won't take place now. It will take place every other year. This data doesn't come from the quality of life. This data comes from the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities, which is a government office, and they are dragging their heels. That's the, am I allowed to say that?
You've said it.
Okay. It's publicly said as well. Wow. That's the problem. And this is actually, if we look at last year's performance that I presented, it said almost the same thing. That it's the OHID that's not providing the data. Apologies.
So just to follow up.
I guess it's worth acknowledging that the council presumably uses data from a large variety of partners, certainly in the various boards that I sit on. We see data from the NHS, data from the police, and so on. So I guess your team data mines as much as you can, so we're not just reliant on our own data. And the quality of life survey, I think, has drawbacks anyway, because it's self-selected as to who responds. So we should never rely too much on it, and we always need to cross-check it with other sources of publicly available data.
I think it'd be fair to say we'd correlate the data, yes, but it is a really good source of data and information and insight into what's happening in Bristol, to answer the question of the councillor that I can't see now, but yeah.
On the importance of public health and the good outcomes that we could see from all of its deliverables, I think it's important to really think about what is its measure of outcomes. Even looking at the next topic, they use a lot of joint assessment needs assessment, and all of that is then one of the outcomes is then how we see deprived communities, and the indicators of health, well-being, crime, all of that comes through that strategic partnership. So clearly then there's a framework in which we need to be working towards, in how we contract that people are reporting those outcomes against deprivation, and therefore we are getting those indicators from what we already contract, and then the community and the public become an additionality into that. Because I guess maybe this is a question back to yourself, right, Pete? Over the last period of 5 years or so, and yourself, Carol, has the indicators of deprivation changed by what trajectory according your core services?
Wow, put me on the spot.
That's a very wide-ranging question. Remember, this is about the indicators that we are monitoring on this committee, but if you are able to give...
I'd rather not. I can give you, in terms of the measures, thank you for that, in terms of the measures themselves, they are selected by you, effectively, about which measures you want to look at. And as you will have seen already from previous reports, and reports you're going to see shortly, there are lots of measures that can be included here. This was one that was deemed to be something that would be useful, and it would have been useful if the data would have been available. But it's not, so it's no use at all. So your question, I guess, is twofold. What else can we measure? And we will be looking at that. And secondly, has there been a difference in the impact of deprivation, which is what you come to at the end? Is it going the right way?
Over to me. Really good question, though, actually. Really good question. So I guess there are a few things. First of all, you're completely right about contracting and how we gather the information from the services that we commission, because absolutely they are the front line. And so I think we're becoming more sophisticated about what we ask them to provide. But at its heart, at its core, deprivation has not changed in Bristol, particularly in terms of geography. So it tends to be the same areas that come up again and again. So we all know that's what we see. I guess the thing that we are seeing, though, is new communities, actually. So with the influx of the Ukrainians, for example, or the influx of refugees and asylum seekers that we've seen over the last couple of years, the last 5 years. So there's been quite a lot of monitoring specific to those groups, particularly in terms of disease profiles, things like TB. Sexual health. So it's a really big question. It'd be a really interesting thing to do more work on, actually. But bottom line is the geography hasn't changed. The profiles haven't changed particularly. And the council made reference to older men and CVD. That absolutely still is the case. But we also have is a changing profile of Bristol. And also we have that younger population as well. So we've got some things that are really quite specific to Bristol too.
Can I just add to that? I completely agree with Carol, except for one thing. The areas do change slightly, and which is why it delays our publication of one of the quality of life indicators. It doesn't come to this committee, but it does delay it slightly. It's a very small tweak. It's a very difficult calculation, but what Carol says is correct.
Right. I think we need to press on because we've got two very chunky items ahead of us. So. Yeah, and as Pete just indicated to me, don't forget the policy and research team of the council are available for any of us to fire off questions to, or that we're interested to at any point in time. Right. So this report is for noting. So we've noted the performance against the business plan sections that are relevant to this committee, and we have done that. Right. It's just after 11 o'clock. So I'm going to propose a quick comfort break. Can we all make sure we're back in our seats for 11:15, which gives enough time for people to go and do whatever they need to do. And then we're on to the community safety, 2 reports, and we've got the drugs contract after that. So we've got still quite a lot of heavy business to get through. Right. Hello, everyone. We are Public Health and Communities Committee is now resuming after a short break, and we're on to agenda item 10, which is the Community Safety Annual Assurance Report. There is a link here to agenda item 11, which is about the Keeping Bristol Safe report. They are separate organisations and with separate reports, but there is some linkage between them. But they are separate items for our consideration today. So we'll go through agenda item 10 first, and the Bristol Community Safety Partnership Assurance Report. This is for sort of scrutiny and noting. It's not neither of these reports are for decisions, but they are a good opportunity for us to ask questions of the officers and our guest, who I'll introduce shortly, about the very important work that is done. This committee has responsibility for community safety. Our colleagues on adult social care and children's committee have responsibility specifically for vulnerable adults and vulnerable children. But we have a broad remit right across the community safety. There is quite a complicated architecture of the different organisations, boards and committees involved in this area. And a good place to start is the appendix in the report that we're about to look at, which is Appendix A1, which shows right at the top is the umbrella organisation Keeping Bristol Safe, which we're going to come to under the next agenda item. That has an independent chair. And then underneath that is the Keeping Children Safe Board, the Keeping Adults Safe Board, and the Bristol Community Safety Partnership. And it's that group, the Bristol Community Safety Partnership, that we're considering in this item. Underneath that community partnership, which I sit on your behalf, are various boards that look specifically at different items. So there's a Preventing Serious Violence Board, Preventing Antisocial Behaviour, Combating Drugs Partnership, a Strategic Partnership Against Hate Crime, the Domestic Abuse and Serious and Sexual Violence Partnership Group. There's the Prevent Committee. Prevent is the Home Office duty to combat serious radicalisation. In Bristol we call it Building the Bridge. And in development there's a Modern Slavery Strategic Partnership and an Extrafamilial Harm group as well. I sit on most of those. In fact, mostly I sit on all of them, but we've agreed between us that Emily represents us on the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence group, and when it's up and running, on the Modern Slavery Strategic Partnership as well. There's an awful lot of really interesting information in this report, so I'm sure we'll have lots of questions about it. But the good news is that we've got two experts with us to answer our questions. Penny German, the head of the community service, is familiar to all of us, but I'm pleased to say we've also got with us today Superintendent Mark Runacres, who is broadly head of policing in Bristol, but he can describe more accurately what his responsibilities are. But he's the co-chair or the chair of the Community Safety Partnership. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself and explain what your role is, and then go on with Penny to introduce the report?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk about the work that we've done.
Sorry. Yes. Sorry, just to stop you, I'll just draw attention to the fact that one of our members, Councillor Lisa Durston, has recused herself from this part of the meeting because of a pecuniary interest, because she works in the area of combating sexual violence and domestic abuse. So Lisa is rightly withdrawn from the meeting, but she will be returning later on. Mark.
Okay, thank you. So just to explain my role in the partnership structure that has been explained. So I'm the police representative within the Community Safety Partnership, and I chair the Keeping Communities Safe group. And we could talk about the priorities that sit within that group in due course. And I'm also the police representative within the Keeping Bristol Safe executive. So in that role, I'm the the signatory on behalf of the constabulary on the reviews, the serious case reviews, the domestic homicide reviews and the like, that kind of work which we have a statutory responsibility to deliver within the city. And whilst those three groups, keeping communities safe, keeping adults safe and keeping children safe, have those separate boards, I just want to highlight the connections that exist between them, so you're not thinking that they're working in isolation of each other. Because if we look at things like domestic abuse and the serious violence issues that we've had to manage through the last year particularly, clear relevance to keeping children safe and to a lesser degree keeping adults safe, but relevance there also, but certainly highly relevant to keeping communities safe. So we don't work in silos, we're interconnected, have very good working relationships, and many of us link into the various delivery groups and the boards as well. So it's a pleasure to be here to talk through the work that we've done and take any questions that you have. I think that's all I need to say by way of introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, so this report is coming to you as part of your scrutiny function. And I guess it's important to say that keeping communities safe is the name given to the Bristol Community Safety Partnership. So people use them interchangeably, so some people might find that confusing, but they're the same thing. The council is required to meet at least every 12 months to review and scrutinise crime and disorder functions. And this is a corporate function, and it involves all the council departments and many partners. And as the chair has said, Appendix A is the full report, and it sets out the variety and the scale of the work of the Community Safety Partnership for 23-24, but it does also comment on the early part of 24-25. And producing the report, the report is a reflection of a huge amount of collaboration and partnership work across the public sector, across the community and voluntary sector, and with citizens and communities. There are 7 priorities, and the structure chart that the chair referred to kind of reflects these priorities, so preventing serious violence, antisocial behaviour, drug and alcohol related harm, domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, modern slavery, hate crime, and child exploitation. That area of work has now moved under the Keeping Children Safe partnership. Underpinning all of this work are some shared principles, which are about actively listening to and working with young people and communities, taking an equity-led approach, and ensuring that decisions are driven by evidence, data, and insight, and the triangulation of those things. I do want to register my apologies to SARI, an organisation that we work with all of the time, but we have made an error in their name. We've said that they're called Stand Up Against Racism and Inequality. They are Stand Against Racism and Inequality, so my apologies to SARI. The report finishes with the emerging priorities for the coming year, building on our current work and what we've learned. So they are strengthening a one city approach to reducing serious violence, community cohesion, working closely with neighbourhoods and communities throughout all aspects of community safety, inequity and social exclusion, and increasing rates of acquisitive crime. Obviously, we're not looking to increase the rates of acquisitive crime. We're looking into the fact that inquisitive crime has increased. Over to you.
Thank you, Mark and Penny. Right, what I suggest we do, because there's quite a lot of content in this report, is first of all, if people have any sort of overarching questions, let's take those first. But then what I'm going to do is go through each of the areas that are covered by the boards that I mentioned. So broadly following the contents that are on page 50 of our pack, working our way through serious violence, antisocial behaviour, alcohol and other drugs, domestic abuse, modern slavery, hate crime, and prevent. So take questions on those topics as we work through rather than go all over the place. But if there are any overarching questions on how all these boards work together, I'll take those now. And if there aren't, we'll... Emily?
I'll ask my question and then you can decide whether to deal with it now, because I'm not quite sure. But yeah, my question is about, so I think the report refers to the Domestic Abuse Survivor Forum, which has obviously been really important and has done some amazing work. But my question is just, how do we draw on the lived experience in respect of the other work streams, and also how do we capture community voice in respect of all of them? It's probably an answer for each as we go through, but so I don't have to keep putting my hand up. And
Yeah, I think that is an overarching question about community voice and lived experience, so that's great.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that representation is heard in certainly the groups that I'm involved in, and it's been quite an enlightening process for me, really, understanding more about the importance and the value that those voices bring into the forums. So it's a standing agenda item, for example, in the Combating Drugs Partnership, which is a group which Christina and I jointly chair. Within the Preventing Serious Violence Board as well. At the start of the meetings, there'll be an input from service users, young people particularly, we focused on around their experience. And we're developing that further. I mean, some work that we were able to do in policing, because my understanding and awareness of lived experience as kind of a resource really for us to learn from has increased enormously in the last couple of years. So we've done some collaboration with Independent Futures and on the back of the Changing Futures programme to bring representatives of that group in to speak to my police teams about their experiences of service users in terms of policing and how we can respond to their feedback and concerns. So yeah, absolutely would want to reassure you that it's embedded within the groups, but it's something that we're looking to develop further as well.
Okay, any other overarching questions before we delve into the detailed sections? I've just got one, which is more of an observation than a question, and relates to point 3, the statutory reviews that take place after any serious events, whether it's vulnerable adults or a homicide, that just to draw attention to everyone about the Silver motion that was passed by full council. In fact, it was this week, wasn't it? It's been quite a busy week this week, which was broadly about mental health, but did have specific elements in it about reducing the rate of suicide in the city. So I hope all of the relevant boards and partnerships will take note of that motion, and we'll seek to implement it. Right, if we go through the specific sections, so starting off with section 5 of the report, which is page 56 of the councillors' packs, and that's the Preventing Serious Violence partnership, which is an opportunity if people wish to address knife crime and other acts of violence. I've just got a question, it's probably for you, Mark, to begin with, about how we describe offences, because there are 2 bar charts in the report. One is all knife flagged offences by all ages, which in 2021-22 were 1,606, and in the most recent year, for which we have data 23-24, was 1,953. Do all knife offences, because there's a danger this gives sort of quite a stark impression, mean the offence of carrying a knife rather than an attack involving a knife?
Yeah, so that would include offences where someone is in possession of a knife, or if a knife has been used to make a threat in a robbery, for example, as opposed to some of the other data sets that we look at around actually the use of a knife and injury being sustained. Although technically, brandishing a knife and making a threat to someone would constitute an assault in itself. So it becomes quite a complex area in terms of legislation as to how things are defined. But certainly, yeah, that increase is quite stark. I would want to flag that since then there has been very significant reductions achieved. The data that relates for 23-24, that primarily relates to an increase in knife-related assaults that we suffered as a city, primarily in East Bristol. That was, on reflection now, the precursor to the events that played out in the early part of last year South Bristol aside, the incident with Max and Mason is separate from the commentary I give there. But if you, there's actually a very helpful media article which Claire flagged to me just a moment ago on the BBC local page website, which maps the instances of knife crime, knife assaults that played out throughout the last year. And if you look at the red dots on the map are numbered, and they show the date that the incidents occurred, and the increase through February, particularly around East Bristol, reflects some of the problems that we were having to manage around heightened levels of tension, street-based violence, primarily involving young people as victim and perpetrator. And that was the continuation of a trend that had been less evident but had been there through the latter part of the preceding year, 2023, but that has now been managed down quite effectively through some really targeted, coordinated work that we delivered under the banner of Operation Hardy.
And thanks for that. And the bar chart underneath that, which is serious violence, knife-flagged offences, could you describe what that covers? Everything from stabbing to anything else?
Yeah, you'll have to excuse me because I don't have the exact definition, but when we're looking at serious violence and we're looking at a higher level of offence, that would be robberies or assaults where the knife has been used and actually someone has sustained an injury, rather than where it's just been carried or used in an implied threat.
And final question from me before I open it up, because this is about sort of reassuring the community, because often press reporting of this might give the impression that Bristol is a violent city where violence is increasing, and I don't think the data backs that up. But another bar chart that's in the report is comparing Bristol to other core cities, which is a meaningful comparison, which shows that Bristol has a far lower rate of, it's described here as police violence, which is probably not the most helpful description of what the bar chart is showing, but Bristol has a much lower rate of violent offences compared to a lot of other core cities, with Newcastle at the top and Bristol, in fact, being at the bottom. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. What happened around 12 months ago, I'm firmly of the opinion that the timing of the tragic incidents that we experienced, with Max and Mason being stabbed on the 27th, 28th of January, and then just over 2 weeks later, Darian Williams losing his life in Rawlsley Park, and those other offences that I've explained. But those two headline incidents, they clearly threw a spotlight on the city. We all will be aware of the national headlines that they brought. They were completely unconnected. Now, in terms of the thematic and the underlying issues around young people carrying and using knives, of course there are links. But there was nothing directly linking why those two incidents that had such a high profile happened so closely to each other in the calendar. And that was, in terms of the reputational impact for the city, that was hugely significant and really, really damaging. But it didn't reflect that, as was reported, that Bristol was this hub of violent crime nationally that necessitated the level of concern that some then concluded that existed from that. And I think that that's reflected. Yeah, we're a big city. We have all of the challenges that you know as well as I do around all of the issues that feed into serious youth violence, particularly around deprivation, exploitation, the harms that the drugs markets can bring. But yeah, I think that's a helpful and hopefully a reassuring graph that shows our position is fairly consistent and in fact better than many other cities of equivalent size and makeup.
Thanks, Mark. Right. Does any other questions about serious violence? Ed, and then Emily, and then Sibs.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for coming to speak about this today and adding, giving some very useful clarification there. Just sticking with the two charts on not all knife flagged offences and serious violence knife flagged offences. I note some of the commentary underneath the graph describes the increase in offences with a knife during this period, 23-24, with increased intensive police operations resulting in more offences being logged. And we've just talked a bit about some of those intensive operations. So is the implication there that that a significant part of the apparent rise in figures in here being to do with more of these types of crimes being recorded in the first place, rather than a higher instance of those crimes more generally. Is that the implication here?
It's probably the implications that the text would suggest. I don't wholly subscribe to that. I mean, because as I said, we know that through that period, particularly in East Bristol, there was a significant and fairly steady increase in knife-related offences, and we now better understand. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and we do try to be on the front foot, and we've done some great work in partnership to mitigate risk where it's identified. But we know, I can talk more freely about it now that the trials have played out, that there were links between offences which were committed during that latter part of 2023 and 2024 that fed into rising tensions relating to young people involved or at risk of serious youth violence. That's where we've been able to then focus our efforts through the coordinated partnership response to identify young people who are at risk either as victim or perpetrator, make sure we're doing some effective work with them through schools, through other providers who are working with them to manage down that risk and get them engaged in more positive activity, as well as, from a policing perspective, doing some targeted enforcement around those that we have intelligence that are carrying knives. So there's a bit of there's elements of both, really. I think, yeah, if we're doing more of the police operations, then we will find more and intercept and recover more knives, which will feed into it to a degree. But that was driven initially by an increase in offending.
That's very helpful to understand. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. Emily was next.
Yeah, thanks. I think you've actually already answered quite a lot of what I was going to ask, which was just about kind of the lessons learned and whether we're changing anything in response to the really tragic instances that we saw last year, and also about whether there are any particular interventions that have been particularly successful in reducing knife crime. My other question, though, that I was going to ask is on the impact on the communities when things like this happen, and particularly the communities impacted last year. So what action is being taken at the moment to engage with those communities that have been really impacted by serious violence and to prioritise them? Because I think some councillors are aware that there's still a real feeling that within those communities that they aren't being included in conversations. And yeah, so what's been done to make those communities feel safer?
Okay, so in terms of the learning of what worked and where the focus needs to be, I think just reconfirms for us the importance of early intervention around young people, and I think the Safer Options work needs to be committed to and maintained to identify those factors that are driving into vulnerability and then create the opportunities for exploitation that will draw young people into higher areas of risk. So that's what I think enabled us to achieve the effective reductions in incidents and risk. The other thing that I'd want to highlight that I think has worked, or we've had clarification around the importance and benefit of, is the work around developing community cohesion. And that's something that linking into, and I just want to touch on how we shape our priorities. I'll come back to that in a moment though. But yeah, just understanding the importance of, from a policing perspective, engaging communities in the work that we do. So there's some work that we're progressing as a partnership now through the coming year around a stretch of Stapleton Road to try and address some of the underlying issues that emanate from the open drugs markets in that area of the city, the impact that has on local communities, but developing the plan in a way that's really engaged and connected with the local community. So it's not agencies delivering this work with the best of intentions for the good of the community, but it's the community guiding us and supporting us as we do what we can together to address these underlying causes and achieve sustainable improvements. Just touching on that around, and I meant to mention it earlier, so I'll just drop it in now. Our priorities are shaped, our starting point for them is the Police and Crime Commissioner's plan. So that's, if you looking at those 7 issues that we're focusing on, why are we focusing on those and not other issues? We don't drop the other issues that aren't on that list. So you're tackling burglary, for example, is still really important to the partnership in the community safety team, but we need to have a focus on what's most important for us. The Police and Crime Commissioner's plan will be our starting point, but then I'm always really keen that we then tailor that to meet the needs of Bristol, because of course the Commissioner's plan extends across all of Avon and Somerset. We have a new Police and Crime Commissioner now who has just published their new plan. So through this year, we'll be reshaping our priorities to make sure they align with that plan. I don't anticipate much change, but we need to do that in consultation with communities and also with our understanding of what's important to Bristol. So, for example, the new Commissioner's plan doesn't explicitly reference hate crime as being one of the priorities. It's still clearly important. For Bristol, we need to retain that as one of our priorities, in my opinion, because of the city's status as a city of sanctuary, the inclusive nature that we have, the identity that we have, around inclusivity in Bristol, to embrace and engage the diversity that we have. If we saw the risk that was reflected through August last year, where there was the uprising of those from the more far right who were looking to have the protest in Old Market, and how the community responded to that identified risk. I think that showed the risk that exists around hate crime within the city and the importance of us retaining it as a priority. So I've digressed slightly there, but hopefully that helps build some understanding of why we shape our priorities as we do.
Do you want to add to that, Penny?
So in addition to that, we've been working on really strengthening the Preventing Serious Violence Partnership Board, and we're really clear that addressing knife crime, exploitation of young people, we can only do that in collaboration with our communities. So it's absolutely vital that we put them at the heart of what we do. The Preventing Serious Violence Partnership Board has community representatives. It has people who have been commissioned to bring youth voice to the table, and we're working through how we make that work most effectively. There's a lot of work going on in communities, and one of the things that we're developing as a partnership is a locality partnership. So really kind of working through with communities how we collaborate at a hyper local level and really put that at the heart of what we're doing.
All right, Sibs, you indicated, and then Cara.
Yeah, I think some of the points have really been addressed, but I'll just emphasize, or just to get more confirmation from yourself, Mark, and thanks for being available for today, is how do we, what's your thoughts on the importance of early intervention through the reach within communities that we know are furthest from actually engaging with it, because they have in-depth experience within serious violence?
Sorry, can you clarify exactly what you
Sure.
mean there? I just want to make sure I answer the question
That's all right.
appropriate.
So, for example, when looking at the boards and the list that's been provided here, I'm conscious of then thinking about the in-depth reach into some of the families that have got historic history of serious violence, and how that the board has got effective reach into some of those communities at an earlier stage, versus boards that don't necessarily have got that lived experience, intense lived experience. If we're saying that the situation is so serious in Bristol, then we really do need boards that have got that intense lived experience. And they may not necessarily always be palatable people to have on the board, but they have the reach within the communities. And I'm just looking at this and thinking, are the people on the board just the more palatable people, or because of the need that needs to be addressed, are we taking serious measures of engaging families and communities and people with the intangible lived experience to bring them on board on that place-based approach to really tackle issues at an early intervention based on their reach? Because your reach and our reach is very different to people that are in those industries and have changed their lives and want to be instruments of good. How are we utilizing that level of lived experience versus just, touch points?
Okay, so yeah, I understand fully now. And yeah, we need to be accessing those networks. I think within the partnership board, we would always seek to. engaging as diverse and as representative a cohort as we want is always a challenge. But I think one of the issues is how traditionally we structure ourselves. So our meetings are all quite formal still, and you will have them either here at City Hall or at a police station or something, which in itself can be a barrier. So I think we need to create an opportunity. We need to be flexible in how we create that space, and so it is welcoming. But I think accepting there's always going to be a challenge. The board needs to be the enabler to manage and facilitate the structures that are then existing at delivery level to make sure we're connecting within those networks. So for us in policing, that will be working with people who have lived experience of the criminal justice system, who have that, but they have with that credibility amongst the cohort that we're seeking to engage with. We're very aware of that. I can go somewhere with the very best of intentions, but this is a barrier straight away, let alone my identity as a police officer. So we can't rely on our ability to do it ourselves. We need to be working with people in the community who have that credibility, and hopefully they have that level of trust in us that we are well intentioned in what we're looking to achieve. So there are a number of people that we're working with in police channels. I can talk about individuals like Desmond Brown from Growing Futures that we work with extensively, Mayor Matakole, who we've worked with and continue to work with extensively, Amari Kato, who we work with to co-produce a video resource for young people around their rights relating to stop and search. But in fact, when we did that, it was really important as part of that work for it not to be badged as being supported by the police, because that in itself could then become a barrier for young people wanting to view it and engage and have any faith and confidence in it. So I hope that gives some reassurance around our understanding and commitment to that.
So that's my kind of message really around reach and with people with deeper reach. And I think maybe we need to explore how training of people with lived experience, intense lived experience, I'll emphasize on that intensity, that maybe there's some sort of training to support them to be the levers of change, so we can kind of really work on their strengths of engagement and communicating with young people at their lived experience that they both understand, and not being wet behind the ear lived experience people or corporates that are not within that lived experience to be supporting people that are 10 years in that lived experience. I think it's really important that we could have or explore training to support communities to be able to deliver, so we can diversify that level of commissioning to individuals and organizations that are not necessarily in those boards or well commissioned, because I think that's really important.
I think that's a great takeaway for us to link that into the Preventing Serious Violence Board, to see how we can collectively make that offer to extend the reach, because that will achieve exactly what we're hoping to.
Right, I'll have Cara next, then we'll move into the next section.
You talked a little bit about sort of retaliation, and that when some of these attacks, and I know some of them definitely aren't linked to each other, but that you have to be aware that there's a risk that when one stabbing occurs, that the likelihood of serious violence increases. I wondered whether, obviously, how much there's an element of child criminal exploitation involved in this, linked to possibly the illicit drug trade, and how the police factor that in, and what you're doing to understanding sort of the crossover between how the illicit drug trade is driving the social problems.
Yeah, absolutely, Cara. The drugs markets are a huge driver for a lot of the violence and serious youth violence amongst that, where young people are exploited and brought into that space where they are then given drugs, they run drugs, and that will inevitably increase the risk that exists around them. We know that our drugs markets in East Bristol are primarily open. They're fairly open street dealing for the markets around there. That in itself can create risk and opportunity for people to come into conflict with each other, because it's very visible and open, and they'll see each other out and about. The drugs markets in other parts of the city are largely closed drugs markets, still managed and run by organised crime. But that I think the violence will still be perpetrated in those parts of the city, but it's less visible because the markets have a different makeup and configuration. But it's key. It's a key factor, and it's a key factor that we need to understand and tackle to reduce down the risk. And we need to collectively create more positive opportunities for young people in the city. So there's an alternative, because that's a conversation I've had with parents in the Malcolm X Centre after Dante Davis was stabbed a couple of years ago now in Newtown, about the challenges that in that setting, it was lots of single mums that were talking about the challenges that they face because their teenage sons are coming home wearing expensive trainers and clothes that they know that they wouldn't have been able to afford with money gained from legitimate purposes. But they felt they were really struggling, some of the ladies that I spoke to that evening, with how to manage the positive influence they wanted to exert over their sons. And that, you know, in a microcosm, just illustrates an example of the challenge that they face, because they can see it happening before their eyes, where their sons are being drawn into likely criminality through their lack of other opportunities.
Carol.
Hi, yeah. So I'm just, it's not questions, but statements, because I really feel that we're missing something desperately, because I know for a fact, Mark, you've been working on this for years and years, as we all have come together so many times, and yet the stats are not going down. And as I re-listen to the arguments, there's some stick-out points for me. So, for example, we tend to talk very much about the young people, and I've just been looking at the stats, and I see that it's like over 60% people are youth, but 40% aren't. And we're not talking about that. And also the relationship with other crimes. So, for example, domestic abuse deaths that are caused, a high proportion of those are also knife crime as well. We're not talking about that. And also, controversially, we talk very much about the perpetrators, but we don't talk about what we're doing to change them from being perpetrator. I don't know how to put this, but what I want to say here is that they're ours too. And unfortunately, you know, they haven't been jettisoned in from Mars. They're also from our communities, and they are our sons too. Fortunately for myself, I've not had that experience, but a lot of parents are having that experience, and I can't imagine getting a knock on my door for either side of that coin. It must be despicable. But if I put my proactive hat on, I desperately would like to see something in the lane of perpetrator prevention, support, something along those lines. And I know what I'm saying sounds a bit different, and it should do, because I think we need to be doing something different if we're going to get different results. We cannot keep coming into these rooms having the same discussion, and my heart goes out to you, because what can you do? But we've got to do something different than what we have been doing if we're going to change the landscape, save lives, and support both the victim and the perpetrator families as well. I don't want any of those knocks on my door. I'm willing to fight, therefore, at this point, before it gets anywhere near my home. But unfortunately, for many, it's already happened, and we've got to do something different to help.
It's a very good point that you make, and I'd want to acknowledge that the focus that we've had on serious youth violence in the last 12 months, for reasons I've explained, that doesn't mean that there isn't a keen focus and an understanding of the wider issues around knife crime and linked into domestic abuse and other offending types. You know, our commitment is to working with perpetrators. If that's not being as effective as we need it to be, then we need to work with that. You know, the perpetrator-focused programs that exist around domestic abuse prosecutions and criminal justice outcomes are already there. That's not an area of policing that I'm as well versed in as some of the other things that I've spoken about already. So I apologise for not being able to give more information around that. But certainly there is a focus on changing behaviours. But I do think, yeah, it's an obvious thing to say, isn't it? But the young people of today are the adults of the future, aren't they? And I think there are some, and I've spoken to guys in my professional experience who I've worked with and had encounters with, 20 years ago, and now there's a guy particularly that I can recall, and we had calls to deal with try and support his son who was a young missing person, and he had completely turned his life around from the path that he had been on, which was that around exploitation and drug dealing, and he's now driving a lorry up and down the motorways and doing really well for himself. But the conversations I've had with him just do reflect that in some ways he's sort of the exception, because many of his old peers are still engaged in that offending behaviour, but at a higher level. We know that victims can become offenders in other types of criminal offending, and I think that is relevant to some of what we see around exploitation and serious violence. So yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that wider reach of serious violence as you flag.
Right, I'm going to move on now to antisocial. We've got a lot of things to get through. I'm just mindful of time. So section 6 is reducing antisocial behaviour. Does anyone have any questions or observations, brief observations they want to make about that? No. We'll go on to section 7, which is preventing and reducing harmful consumption of harmful drugs, including alcohol, of course. Any members have any questions about that? I've got one before we kick off, because it's a statistic that is missing from this that I was looking for. The number of drug-related deaths in Bristol and how that compares to elsewhere, because Scotland and Glasgow in particular is quite often in the news as having the highest rates of drug-related death in the UK, and I just wondered what the data was for drug-related deaths in Bristol and how we compare again to our family of core cities.
We were going to do a team effort, because there's some thematics where specialist knowledge. I mean, I'm aware of some issues relating to the drugs deaths risk that exists, and I'm happy to talk about that. But Julie, have you got detail relating to the drugs deaths specifically, as has been asked?
I can say that, like most of the core cities, our rates have gone up, but in 2023, because the data, there's always quite a lag on it, has to get to the end of the year, has to then be all analysed before we receive it. It's not straightforward. We have 59 deaths in 2023 that were drug-related deaths.
And while every death is clearly a tragedy, and part of the work that we do in this area is to avoid that, is that low compared to other core cities? I know Glasgow, from what you've told me before, is over 300.
Yeah, so Glasgow in the same year had 303 deaths, drug-related deaths. Other core cities, Birmingham, Manchester, have much higher numbers than us and a rate that's fairly comparable, but a little bit higher in some. We're not an outlier, particularly against core cities.
Right. Any other questions from the committee? Bear in mind, we've got our drugs contract report later, so there's a wider opportunity to discuss drugs then. But there are particular points about this report. We'll take them now. So we've got Ed, Emily, and Cara.
Thank you, Chair. Under 7.14, there's a chart showing the number of adults in treatment provided by the National Drug Treatment Monitoring System. And there's a very significant uptick there when it comes to non-opiate, referrals for non-opiates treatment. It's looking like it's nearly doubled in the space of around 18 months. Do we have a sense of what's driving that increase in non-opiate treatment over that quite short time period?
So I'll give my take, and Julie can come in and probably give a more informed response. The improvements are largely linked to the introduction of our Combating Drugs Partnership, and that's why, if you look at the national figures, they'll, for many areas, reflect similar improvements. So we were required to introduce the Combating Drugs Partnership around 2 years ago now. It's been a fantastic, of great benefit to us. It brings together, and we've got a really strong partnership in Bristol. It brings together membership. Often our meetings are monthly, and still we have 25 to 30 people on the screen for the meetings, really active, engaged membership. That's driven the better coordination of our decision making around all of the issues relating to drugs. Our drugs treatment performance wasn't where we needed it to be, and there's been significant improvements already, but they need to be maintained. So that's the sort of the broad answer. Julie, is there more details you'd like to come in with?
No, apart from just to say, I think it's that systems approach, really focusing on the data, the evidence and driving, working across the partnership, recognising we have multiple partners and we need to work together.
I'm really sorry to intervene here, but that doesn't really answer my question. I was asking about what you believe is driving the increase in non-opiate treatment referrals in the last 18 months. I didn't ask about the partnership and how successful the partnership was.
Okay, so in regard to non-opiate treatment increases, that's absolutely what we want to be seeing, is more and more people coming into treatment, because that otherwise was an unmet need. So the partnership work that we've done, the improving of pathways and routes into treatment, so we had quite a complicated way of accessing treatments. We did a whole review around that, and we simplified that so that people that working towards a no wrong door approach, single assessments, and meeting people where they are, taking a trauma-informed approach, and that's how we've seen some of those impacts. And we're seeing that month-on-month increase, which is really exciting, and what we want to be seeing as a city.
Emily?
Yeah, thanks. I guess linked to that in terms of adults in treatment, I think it's the next chart. It was just one that jumped out of me in terms of the numbers for Leeds are a lot higher. I would have thought that Leeds is a good comparator, but please tell me if for some reason it's not. And if it is there anything that they're doing there that we could look to do here? Do we know why their numbers are so much higher?
I assume that these are absolute numbers rather than...
Yeah.
In the
Well, and so
the population of Leeds is about 800,000.
So is it just not a comparator we should be?
I'm guessing that's the answer.
I'll just come in. I will say that during that period of 23 to 24, that's when we were working on our improvement journey. So I would hope to see that gap is narrower now. If we're looking towards the end of this year, we've had an extra 700 people in treatment during last year. So that gap I would expect to reduce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then also what are we doing to improve continuity of care?
Lots of things. Again, the CDP is our driver for that. It has got our health and justice partners sitting very closely as partners on that table. We've developed pathways for improving that same-day prescribing. So if somebody comes out of prison, they should be met at the gate. We have got some areas that we still need to improve, so that's very much a priority for us, both now but also as we go into our new provider model from the 1st of April. So that's all being worked through to streamline and make sure that communication between our criminal justice system within the prisons, that preparedness happens, so that when they come out, they are picked up on the same day.
There is another context, just whilst we try to compare like with like. If you look at the From Harm to Hope, the 10-year government strategy around drugs, there's data in there that reflects that I think Bristol has the 7th or 8th highest proportion of opiate users per 10,000 of population nationally. As a local authority area, we've got the highest proportion against that measure south of Merseyside. So there, as a city, there is a heightened level of risk that exists around that cohort.
Right, Cara next.
Two questions. The first one is that I note that one of the key deliverables is an expansion of access to structured treatment, and obviously getting people out of problematic drug use is going to help with crime and health outcomes. Is the closure of the AC unit going to impact that key deliverable, and what are we going to do to mitigate that?
I think it's best if Julie addresses that.
Yes, absolutely fine. We've had no formal notification yet in writing regarding the AC unit as of this morning. But we have been informally advised that it was closing at the 31st of March. I think I need to be really clear that the AC unit is located in Bristol, but it is a regional centre, a specialist centre for inpatient detox and stabilisation. So the impact of this closure we will feel in Bristol, because we have purchased through this last 12 months and in previous years a number of beds, but other areas in the southwest are also significantly impacted, and it is a commercial decision, my understanding from AWP, that they were unable to secure enough joint partners, other organisations, other local authorities to secure those beds going forward. We've been working with them over the last few years to try and support and encourage that engagement with other local authorities. So we are and will be looking. We have a new lead provider, Turning Point, which is the paper I'm sharing later, who we are working with them because they will be contracted to provide an inpatient service. I think it's important to recognise that there are also some community-based, really enhanced support that can be given for some people that may reduce their need to go into an inpatient detox unit. But there will be those that absolutely, they do need that service, and we will need to, as a council, to work with our provider to ensure that that service can be provided.
So that's reassuring to know we'll be looking to continue that service, however we work out how to do it.
Yeah.
My other question is about the police carrying naloxone, because obviously that's one of the most effective ways we can reduce drug overdose deaths in the city. And I understand there has been some police training by Bristol Drug Project, but apparently it's stalled. So I wondered whether you would be able to clarify whether the police are carrying naloxone and what your policy is and going forward.
Yeah, so we were fairly early adopters of police officers and PCSOs being issued naloxone if they wanted to. So that's the important point. This is volunteer officers who want to have the opportunity to carry it and administer naloxone. It's been a real frustration of mine, if I'm honest, because it's then been caught up in the Health and Safety Board within the constabulary. There's been different opinions on medical advice as to some of the uncertainty that existed around liability that could exist for officers around carriage and then use or non-use. The latest concern that we've needed to work through, which has led to the rollout of further training being paused, is just some reassurance being sought from that board around the fact that training covers the importance of officers considering other emergency health interventions. So you can't solely rely on administering naloxone and sit back and think everything else is okay. You need to be considering what else you should be doing as a first responder to try and support and assist that person. So that's all covered. I'm reassured that the training that officers receive does and did always cover that, but we need to go back to the Health and Safety Board to report that to them to get their approval. But what I would say is that the officers who have been issued with naloxone are still carrying it. They're still able to administer it. It was just the further rollout that was paused. Most forces have caught up with us now, and there's only a handful nationally that aren't carrying naloxone, which I think strengthens the position because it takes away some of the concerns that some senior officers had around, are we putting ourselves out on a limb here and are we doing something that we shouldn't, particularly where there was that conflicting medical advice. But no, at the moment, those that were trained are still carrying it, and I'm very confident that more will be trained in the future.
Great, thanks very much.
Right, can we move on to, because we've got another discussion about drugs coming up later on, can we move on to domestic abuse and violence against women and girls? Emily?
Yeah, I guess a few points. And I know a lot of this is actually really difficult stuff, but I guess one of the points that jumped out is about domestic abuse and suicide, which, well, suicide obviously was discussed at full council earlier this week, and I know it's a really difficult topic for a lot of people. But according to Refuge, it's estimated that around 3 women a week die by suicide as a result of domestic abuse, and I know it's been in the news this week. And we also know that the number of people receiving support following sexual violence who have survived an attempt on their own life, the numbers are really, really stark there as well. So I think it's just, really to emphasise that and how much needs to be done to support victims of sexual violence and domestic abuse. And it just says kind of how much work we have still to do. In terms of, I guess, questions on on the report. I was hoping you could give a bit more information on the Drive Perpetrator programme, particularly in terms of how you measure the success of that. And also, if you could just talk a bit about steps being taken to, I guess, on a prevention side as well, to bring about a long-term cultural change. I think this also probably links to hate crime as well. But, you know, even this week in my ward, I've had really quite shocking examples of, well, one of the secondary school in my ward, graffiti in the tunnels on the way to that school, which has been talking, you know, graffiti set talking about free someone that's been accused of rape everywhere and kind of celebrating that person. So, you know, it's just, sometimes it feels like really quite depressing in terms of where we've got to go. So if you could just talk about what's being done with, I guess, young people particularly to bring about more of a cultural change, because sometimes, or at the moment, it feels like we're going in the wrong direction.
Well, I'll have Mark and Carol maybe first.
Okay, no, thank you, Councillor. So I think your first question was related to Drive. And so Drive is a national programme and it's focused on high-risk, high-harm perpetrators. So there's a national evaluation of that programme taking place. Bristol joined the Drive programme, I think, about 18 months ago now. It was up and running in South Gloss for a longer period, so we joined based on their evidence rather than ours. So it's still slightly early days for Bristol in terms of talking about actual numbers, but I can certainly get those for you in terms of the data we've got now.
Sorry, would you just be able to explain do you know how it's actually measured, though? Is it in terms of like people self-reporting, or how do we get that data? How do they get that data?
In terms of how people enter the programme?
In terms of how you're measuring the impact on the people in the programme, yeah.
So I can say very generally, I'm sorry I don't have absolute detail on that, but my understanding is that it's a programme that's led by the police. So actually a lot of the referrals for the programme come via the police, and by professional services. It's not a self-referral programme. So they're already in the system before they get access to Drive. What we have been doing, actually, because, as I say, that's very much about high-risk, high-harm perpetrators, is we're also looking at other perpetrators who aren't hitting the system at that level and trying to engage people in more workshop kind of approaches and more behaviour change kinds of approaches to perpetrators as well. So rather than just focusing just on Drive.
Thank you. It was just understanding. I think it's quite difficult probably to measure some of this stuff if you're relying on a perpetrator to confirm that they've changed behaviours, or you know that.
Well, there are some clearer measures.
Yeah.
So there are some clearer measures. I'm sorry. What I should have said is also, do they reoffend? Is the first obvious one. So actually, certainly from a police point of view, that's exactly the kind of thing they would measure. They also will. I think the evaluation is also talking to relatives of families and getting the perspective of more than the perpetrator. But there is the hard data and then there's the softer work. But the critical one that's measured are the repeat offences. There were a couple of other questions you had as well, though, weren't there?
More about just a cultural change, yeah.
So particularly in terms of schools, we have the Ideal programme, which is all about relationships and particularly about gender and relationships. So particularly in terms of that really horrible example you shared about thinking it's cool or somehow okay to think that that's all right. So the work in schools and particularly with teachers as well as young people is around talking more generally about attitudes to the internet, attitudes towards gender and attitudes towards sex. So the Ideal programme has been, we're relaunching, or rather trying to engage more schools in that programme. We've currently got, I think, about 60% of schools signed up, but we're actually aiming to get more signed up to particularly doing that work.
Can I just add from a constabulary perspective, and this is one of our key priorities, tackling rape, serious sexual offences, violence against women and girls. Our Chief Constable is a national lead in this thematic, and I think that's reflected in some of the work that we're adopting. An example that I can give is in the coming months, we'll be launching a proactive operation in the city centre where we'll be deploying officers overtly and covertly to try and identify predatory offenders who are exhibiting behaviours of concern, and then being able to intervene at an early point to deal with them accordingly. And also that will then lead into opportunities around behaviour change for those individuals. So just a specific example that hopefully gives some reassurance around our interest and commitment to the thematic.
Right, shall we go on to modern slavery, section 9? Any observations, questions about that? If not, we'll go on to hate crime, section 10. Any questions about that? I've just got one. It's sort of relevant to something that's been very prominent in the news this week, and the motion that was before council on Tuesday about the Middle East. Has there been an uptick recently? Because the data we've got here is sort of a year out of date in anti-Semitism and Islamophobic attacks in the city.
Not significantly, no, there hasn't been, and we were able to, through the networks that we have established, bring together, as is reflected in the report actually, a really effective group of community representatives and stakeholders around 15 months ago to navigate our way through the concerns that existed around the increased tensions and the fear of crime. And that was the key issue for us, is that whilst we didn't have a significant increase in hate crime offences being committed, the impact in communities, and in this case particularly our Jewish communities, was very significant. So the importance of engagement and reassurance, some collaboration to support visible policing presence around some of the events that were held openly in public was really, really important, and I think that achieved good successes. So I hope that those communities did feel as reassured as we believe that they were, but it's not something we're complacent about. But for me, it reflects the importance, as I said earlier, around hate crime as a thematic and a priority for the city. It's something that we need to keep front and centre.
I've got one more question. I'll come to you, Emily. It's about the bar chart about the offences. Of course, these are recorded offences where people have actually reported it. Of course, in hate crime, this is the big problem. How do you encourage people to come forward and say that they've been a victim of a hate crime? There's obviously a very large bar chart for racial offences, but sexual orientation is something I'd like to ask about. What does the constabulary do about encouraging probably gay men in particular, but possibly lesbians and bi people as well, to come forward with and having the confidence that they can come forward and it will be taken seriously by the police?
Yes, it's a real long-term challenge for us. I can remember us looking to increase the accessibility, availability of our reporting centres and those reporting channels 25 years ago, and that's work we need to continue. We need to build people's confidence in the fact that, well, build awareness, of course, the first point for some, around how the offending is unacceptable, because some, particularly when you have diverse communities as we have in Bristol, that can be a challenge in itself sometimes, and then building confidence in the fact that the authorities will respond and deal effectively with issues that are reported, and those channels then being accessible, so making sure we're connecting through appropriate venues, communication channels and the like. So huge progress has been made, even more needs to be done, and this is, as you've suggested here, an indicator where an increase in reporting can actually be a real positive, because it can reflect the increased trust and confidence rather than necessarily an increase in offending, which is there but underreported, as we know.
Emily?
Thanks, yeah. I was just looking at the areas where there's been an increase. So I think it's disability, gender and transphobic hate crime, and in particular transphobic. Obviously the numbers are lower, but it looks to be like a higher increase. And it looks to be, I guess, if you're looking at the 3 years, going up quite a lot. Has anything been done in particular to address transphobic hate crime in response to, I guess, this data? And is there anything you can say about the last year? I know we don't have data for it, but based on what you've seen.
I don't have data to bring us right up to date, unfortunately. I think this trend that you've identified, it just reflects a repetition of the trend that we've seen in previous years, probably decades in fact, around other hate crime types, where that quite marked increase in this respect, it reflects a positive around people's increased confidence in reporting behaviours that are already happening. So I don't think that it would reflect necessarily a sudden increase in intolerance and discrimination against that sector of our community. It would more reflect their understanding that we will respond to their needs and will take their reports seriously.
I guess, do we have any evidence to show that? Like, how I guess, would we then know if there has been an increase in hate crime, transphobic hate crime?
Yeah, I mean, the commentary I give there is based on the anecdotal information that we get from the accounts that we would have with victims around the fact they've now got the confidence to report, but it's been going on for many, many years.
Right. And so from your experience, you don't think there's been a particular increase, you just think people are coming forward more?
Whilst there's a marked proportionate increase, the figures are relatively low citywide. That's not something that we've picked up on, but we'd always want to know more, because when we've got more information, we can map those trends more effectively and respond as we need to.
Right, I'm going to skip child exploitation, because that's mainly responsible to Councillor Townsend's committee, and go on to 12, which is the prevent duty and the Building the Bridge partnership. Just want to make one observation here, because the report, I think, is a little out of date, because we were fearful that the continued funding for Prevent was going to end in March. I believe that it's now been confirmed that we're going to continue to get funding for another year. Is that correct, Penny?
We've been invited to apply for funding.
Okay. Having been responsible for this at a national level in the past, there are a relatively small number of parts of the country that the Home Office and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government think deserve special attention and funding. Historically, Bristol was not included in that, which is actually a good thing, because they don't think radicalisation is what in the past was a problem in the city, but we have been included in it in recent years, and it's uncertain whether we will continue in the future. That could be because the national assessment is somewhere else has more of an issue, or Bristol's issues have fallen. We don't know, but I guess we'll find out soon. Abdul, you and I have been involved in this for a long time. A photo flashed up on my Facebook this morning of you and I looking much younger in, I think, 2013 meeting with Zahir Shabir, who's the excellent chair of Building the Bridge, to talk about this. But what's your question?
So you've addressed some of the part of my question, but Bristol, I feel, is not at the height of attention when it comes to radicalisation, and Prevent is a programme that initially, ironically, had a really good response from the Muslim community, even though it was quite negative, but they were engaged. At this point, we don't know where it's going, and I have a real problem with that, especially if we're going to have something in the local community that talks about extremism and includes the Muslim community. In fact, the programme that's delivered has a chair that's from the Muslim community. So in terms of Prevent in Bristol, I want to be, I need to have more information about where we are with that at the moment. I've searched the internet many times to find out how we're involved, how the council's budget benefits from this type of fund, but is it Prevent? Is it Building the Bridge? Is it a Prevent partnership? Is it BMSLG? Is it Channel? Is it Contest? Is it Remedy? I mean, there are so many different things that you can point to when it comes to Prevent and the potential of Bristol in some way, being part of the Prevent agenda. I don't really have much of an issue with that, but I also, with the second hat, chair one of the largest mosques in Bristol, and there has been a barrier of information that comes, and when we need help and support within the community, there is a bit of gatekeeping that happens. I look at the initiatives that have been delivered. I can't relate to one of them, and I'm quite a high-profile Muslim individual, and so who's doing this work on my behalf and my community's behalf? And how can I get that information? as a leader, if I struggle, I hate to think what the rest of my community go through. Thank you.
Come in initially. I don't know, Claire, if you've got anything to add, given the work that AJ does, but I think what you've explained, Abdul, reflects how Prevent has changed, certainly for the city, over the duration of its being in existence. If you go back to the days when it was founded, the focus then was very much around preventing extremism and perceived risk within Muslim communities. That was absolutely evident. That landscape's changed quite a lot now, but I think that caused the work to have a particular relevance to our Muslim communities, and kind of reconfiguring that in the years through which there's been a change to the areas of identified concern, where primarily now there's most of the concerns that I hear about from policing extent relate to right-wing extremism, and that focus. So I think within that, that's probably why there's now a lack of clarity that maybe there was before around what we want and need from communities. Because if we look at the Channel programme and how we were looking to get people to engage with that, that was focused, again, back in the day, primarily on our Muslim communities. And for the identified risk, it doesn't need to be so to that extent anymore. But I think it's an interesting, useful takeaway for us to reflect on your feedback as to how that confusion feels currently. But that's my take on how it's probably come about from where we were in terms of risk and objectives of the programme to where we are now. Claire, is there anything you'd want to add, or Penny?
So yeah, that's helpful feedback, thank you, and certainly take that on board in terms of being clear about what we're doing. I think we're really keen over the coming year to think about Prevent in that wider community cohesion context. How does it all fit together? What are the tools that we have to help us as a city? So that's kind of our strategic intention going forward. So thank you.
So if I can just have some reassurance that we will be, especially as elected members, be involved with that, because there has been a history of exclusion. I'm not pointing any fingers at any particular administration or anything like that, but I think it's important that there is inclusion whilst I'm a councillor at least. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what we can do, Abdul, is arrange for a meeting with Penny and AJ, who's the relevant officer here, and yourself, and maybe I'll come along as well to discuss all that. Right, I think we've had a good discussion about a very important report. It is in front of us purely for information, and so we're just charging our scrutiny function here rather than decision-making function. So we've had a discussion, we've scrutinised it, so all we need to do is note it. If we can go on now to agenda item 11, which is related. This is about the umbrella organisation over all of these committees, and that's the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership. And we've got with us Carrie Yates, who's our Head of Service for Safeguarding and Quality Assurance, to introduce this report. I don't know whether, Mark, you're going to stay for this, because there might be a question, or do you need to go?
I do need to go.
Right. In that case, we'll excuse Mark to carry on with his other duties.
But I did have an appointment at 12 that I need to get to.
Sorry, right.
I think the bulk of the kind of questions have probably come out of the detailed report that you've already read anyway, which is very specific around community safety. So I'm here to talk about the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership annual report for 23-24, which is here for you to note, and it sets out the scope and work across the partnership across the year, and also our priorities for this year, which we're now progressing. And we've talked a little bit about the context, which is really helpful. So the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership brings together oversight of the strategic safeguarding responsibilities in relation to children, adults and communities. I'm really aware it's a lengthy report, so I've pulled out some kind of key themes, and Penny and Mark have already gone through a lot of the detail in terms of community safety, and then obviously I'll take questions at the end. So first of all, in relation to safeguarding adults, some of the highlights across the year was a new quality assurance framework, which was developed in partnership with ADAS, so the Association of directors of adult social services and the principal social worker. There's been organisational abuse policy created and shared across all partners and creation of a data dashboard. And the focus for this year is to pilot a multi-agency safeguarding hub, which that work's underway, reducing waiting times and having oversight of that, and then focusing on transitions, particularly around transitional safeguarding. For safeguarding children and young people, the highlights this year were the launch of the Children's Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub. So that happened in 23-24 and is now progressing and really well embedded. The successful joint rollout of ICON training for young parents across Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire with the ICB. So ICON training specifically focuses around helping young parents understand how to respond to crying babies and the importance of not shaking babies. The launch of our child sexual abuse pathway and associated resources. So that's really to focus and try and increase what we know is a national problem around reporting of child sexual abuse. There are a range of resources on offer, and we've really rolled that out across the partnership, which has been helpful. We're reviewing that at the moment and the implementation to see if we can take that further. And the Shadow Board have done some amazing work. So that's our children and young people working with the University of Bristol around the survey on vaping, working on the new domestic abuse strategy, and they've also sat on interview panels for senior positions within the council. A focus particularly for our Keeping Children Safe Board and actually the wider Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership this year, moving on into this year, is implementing the new statutory guidance, Working Together to Safeguard Children 2023, which has meant we're making some changes this year around our governance arrangements. There won't be dramatic changes in terms of structure. What we hope it will do is streamline, and we'll maintain those three focus boards: keeping communities safe, keeping children safe, and keeping adults safe. And then just to focus on community safety, again, not into the level of detail that Mark and Penny have, but some of the highlights across the year have been strong partnerships, including long-standing strategic partnership against hate crime, as well as new ones such as Combating Drugs Partnership, which was mobilised following the 10-year drug strategy. Survivors Forum, which we've talked about a little bit already, which is really positive. They've reviewed the council's new domestic abuse and sexual violence strategy and the council's initiative to receive the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance accreditation. The focus for this year is around better coordination of partnership responses to more serious incidents of crime and disorder, especially serious violence and knife crime, which you've already heard some things about. And again, what we've just been talking about, creating a sustainable preventing radicalisation model. And then another really helpful bit to pull out is our statutory reviews across the year. And one of the things I wanted to say that someone made a point about earlier was the crossover between the different statutory reviews and the potential learning across. So the executive group that currently sits across the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership and will become known as the Strategic Oversight Group has oversight of all statutory reviews across the three areas to make sure that we are picking up any themes and learning across the three boards. So in terms of, you can see in the pack the number of statutory reviews on page 112 over the year. So we started 2 child safeguarding practice reviews. For safeguarding adults reviews, 2 were initiated, 4 published, 7 ongoing at the end of the year. And for domestic homicide reviews, 5 were initiated, 3 published, and 15 ongoing at the end of the year. So you can see there's a really significant amount of work happening there. And also the child safeguarding practice reviews are one of those is pulling together thematic learning regarding serious youth violence. So whilst, of course, there were immediate actions taken in terms of a rapid review and immediate learning, that will also give an independent view of the longer term action we can take to try and combat some of the worries raised. So I'm happy to take questions, and I will also, if there are sort of really specific questions around community safety, defer to Penny as well for some help.
Right, thanks, Karen. When we had a good discussion about detail in the previous report, but are there any new areas that committee members wish to raise? Emily and then Cara.
Sorry, I feel like I'm speaking a lot. The one that jumped out to me was self-neglect. So I think it'd just be a bit useful, well, it would be useful to hear a bit about what we're doing on that.
Yeah, and the learning from that, and again, I don't know whether Carol or Penny want to jump in here as well. So the learning from those reviews, we create learning briefs from all of those reviews, which are shared across the partnership. So the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership have responsibility for those and make sure that learning's embedded. In terms of specific actions taken forward, I don't know whether you have anything specific, Carol or Penny?
Certainly I can comment from a point of view of the domestic homicide reviews, and we absolutely do work really hard to try and pull together a coherent response across our reviews. So we take the individual recommendations, but the similar themes come up again and again, so it's really about responding to those. So for example, we're reviewing the way that our MARAC works as a result of some of the themes that are coming through. You mentioned suicide, really important for us because that's one of the themes that has come through for us in terms of the homicide reviews. And interestingly, the Home Office had quite a debate about whether domestic homicide reviews should actually include suicide or not, but then decided that that would be a category that they would continue to include. I know. So we've got some interesting advice from the Home Office as well. But the critical thing I would say is that we're also using it to influence how we manage training and development, and particularly we've got more emphasis on things like coercion, actually, as part of training and helping people to understand what coercion is, not just domestic abuse, because that's come through very strongly from a lot of our homicide reviews.
And we also have a task and finish group working on particular themes around self-neglect to make sure that we're embedding learning, and we're coordinating across the partnerships and multi-agency audits to see if there are further areas we need to develop and how that learning's embedding.
Yeah, I think some common theme throughout these reports is sometimes the way things are described is unhelpful to politicians, let alone the public, because I wondered what domestic homicide meant, and then sort of included suicide. So it's not, to the layman, you might think you're talking about murders in the home, domestic homicide, but clearly has a much wider meaning than that. Could one of you say, for the record, as we are being recorded today, what domestic homicide actually means?
In this case, for domestic homicide, they're talking about someone who's related to the individual or living in the same environment and has died by homicide as a result of that.
So it would be, in the case of suicide, it would be a suicide. How could somebody be related to somebody's suicide?
So, for example, we have had a homicide where someone, the relative, has been a perpetrator but then committed suicide. So it's as a result of.
Is it helpful for us to share the actual terminology, so that's probably a helpful thing for us to do, isn't it? We can share the actual in writing so that people can see how that's defined.
Yeah, if you could share that around the committee, that would be useful. And just as a forward point, because obviously we'll go through this process as a committee next year when we receive the similar reports, if they could go through a sort of almost a plain English check, like I questioned Mark earlier, what does police offences mean? Yeah. In plain English, it means the police have committed offences. So it's some of the terminology in these reports needs to be looked at, and also to have standard terminology across the two of them as well.
Penny and I have already talked about how we can try and bring the two reports together actually more for this year.
Okay, Cara, what's next?
I mean, obviously, a precursor to self-neglect and a lot of this stuff is child mental health, and I was particularly concerned that there is rising concern about the number of children awaiting inpatient beds, and I know children's mental health is in a terrible state and terribly underfunded, but Can you just talk maybe a little bit about the work you're doing to gain the insight into bed numbers and also what we can do to improve those services? Because it seems like children have to have attempted suicide to get help these days, not even just be on the verge of one trying to.
So that's definitely a focus for the Keeping Children Safe group, and we've just completed multi-agency audits across the partnership with colleagues to look at with a specific focus on child mental health. We're also trying, as we develop the new system following the changes because of working together to safeguard children, part of what we're trying to do is streamline our data. What we often find is we have slightly different data across the partnership, so we're trying to develop a really clear shared data set across the partnership, including information about children experiencing acute mental health difficulties, waiting for a bed or currently in a bed, so that we can really have really good oversight and grip of the number of children that's impacting, any changes, any trends, and make sure we're steering that through the Keeping Children Safe group.
Right, one final question on this. It's a short question, please. I'm keen that we give the next item the time it deserves, but I also want to finish at one.
Thank you for the report. Just wanted to check in terms of the funding model. There's quite a obviously dependence on the PCC's budget. What are the alternatives to that? And if the current budget is sufficient or insufficient, how is it actually then supported to scale? So, how could you survive without it? And is it actually meeting everything you need? And how do you kind of support yourself with the shortfall?
So partly we wouldn't survive without the funding, but also there is a statutory obligation on our partners to be part of, particularly the children safeguarding and adult safeguarding. So there is, it's not, our partners don't have a choice about whether they share funding, and there is statutory guidance around what funding is and should be provided. Lots of work has been happening actually more broadly than Bristol, so across the ICB footprint, BNSSG, and also across Avon and Somerset, led by the police, in terms of looking at partnership work across that kind of broad footprint and linking up with other local authorities to see how that's done. So there is a lot of thought and process around our funding. It is really vital that we receive that funding to be able to provide the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership business unit, which drives a lot of this work. But we keep really tight oversight of it. Our system in Bristol is slightly more complicated than some other areas as well, because we work across the 3 boards. So it is a complicated picture that does require a lot of work and precision, but we are really across it, and our partners are really committed to ensuring that we can continue this work.
It's really good to see the review, because obviously you have a devolved model compared to other areas. How do you see that? Is that a positive or a negative, or how do you make that work?
So it definitely adds some complexities, but I see it as a real positive. And into this year, because of the changes, working together to safeguard children is driving, we are taking we will have clear kind of differentiation between the Keeping Children Safe Board, the Keeping Adults Safe Board, and the Keeping Community Safe Board as decision-making boards in their own right. What we really want to make sure we retain and don't lose while we go through that process is the overarching join-up of a strategic oversight group to make sure we are learning across reviews, because there is lots of crossover, to make sure that we are working really closely together on transitional safeguarding, which cuts across lots of all 3 of those groups. So I think there's real benefit to the fact that we take an approach that looks at all 3 together.
I think my last comment, Chair, is that when it comes to the data piece, that part does seem quite underfunded for the kind of complexity of work that you're doing and the change that you're trying to do on the joint needs assessment.
We've definitely got work to do there, and that is a real focus for us. So we're setting up an overarching, I think I mentioned this already, data and performance subgroup that will service all 3 boards, that will pull in we're hoping will pull in resource across partners, because we've got analysts in children's, in adults, in police, in health, all working really hard, producing lots of data. It's not necessarily about putting additional resource in, it's about bringing those people together to create a shared data set. So that's definitely a priority for now, basically.
You're pleading face on Abdul.
I'm so sorry. I've really tried to limit myself in terms of how much I've involved myself in all of the reports, because there's so much interesting stuff and so many comments to be made and observations and questions. Sorry, I'll go to my question, and it really is going to be an obvious yes, I'm hoping, but I just need reassurance that when we're looking at this community safety and your oversight and obviously the work that the board does, that racism of all forms, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, is something that's going to be considered and monitored in the city, but also things like female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and honour-based violence is also going to be a consideration, because it's not spelled out in the report. And really, as Stephen said, sometimes these things need spelling out for the public and even for elected members. Thank you.
Absolutely, definitely a priority. We have had and have ongoing task and finish groups to look around specific issues like forced marriage, FGM. So absolutely a continuing priority for the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership to serve all the people of Bristol and to make sure that we are equitable and really keeping an eye on kind of anti-racist practice as well.
Right, thank you, Carrie. So this report, like the previous one, has come to us for noting and discussion, and we have discussed it, and therefore we are deemed to have noted it. Right, if we go on to our final item, agenda item 12, which is a final update on the award of our contract for dealing with drug treatment, drugs including alcohol. This is something that's come to the committee before as an update of the procedure that was being followed. So this is our final update, which deals with the award of the contract, which has a value of 6.6 million a year. And it's going to start from 1st of April this year, run for 5 years, but with the possibility of continuation beyond that. And I think if I've read this correctly, there's also an additional £500,000 for residential rehabilitation. But we have with us to cover this report Julie Northcote, who's the Deputy Director of Public Health. And if we could all keep our remarks brief on this item, because we are quite a way over our time.
Can I just quickly say Councillor Carol Johnson had to leave before the last item and sent her apologies.
Thank you for that, and I'm pleased that Councillor Lisa Durston has now rejoined us for this item.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go over, Stephen's already given quite a good introduction, but just to say we have moved from, our intention was to move from having 3 separate providers to having 1 lead provider model. We went through a robust re-procurement process, which was completed in November and successfully awarded to Turning Point, who are a national provider, to provide the services and that lead provider model. And they've developed a very clear partnership arrangement with a range of local, hyper-local providers across the city. It is a 5-year +2+2, and as Stephen said, an extra 500,000 specifically on residential rehab. We took the decision to take this approach, recognising that having a strategic lead provider would improve our accountability and we believe develop systemic change within the system, and that will help to support that effective collaboration between providers and that integrated service delivery. As I said before, we have a hyper-local model with that national lead provider bringing their expertise into that local fora. That infrastructure will support us because they can provide that national lens and that national experience of having services in multiple other areas, but recognising that Bristol is a unique area. We have our own unique elements, and it's important to take those into account. We will be retaining some responsibilities for substance use contracts, and that's in regard to our direct contract awards to primary care for our substance use prescribing, some work around our homelessness accommodation pathways, and that's working closely with our housing colleagues. And we will have an essential requirement of the contract that Turning Point will work closely and align with our other services to ensure those shared outcomes are achieved. We will also, as a council, retain our commissioning arrangements for a product called Theseus. It's a care management system which has been very well established in the city, and all of our current providers have been using it, and we want to continue that. We felt that was very important, and that's through a provider called Cybermedia. We will task Turning Point contractually to lead and manage all aspects of our residential rehab pathways on behalf of this council. And our new service will include that improved prevention and early intervention element of children and young people. We recognise those are an intrinsic part of our substance use services. And that's to prevent that escalation. It's getting prevention in early and those more harmful patterns of drug and alcohol use. Again, aligning really closely, we are re-procuring also our children's treatment element of substance use services, not within this contract, that's a separate contract, and it will be really important that the successful provider of that contract, again, Turning Point, work really closely with that. We have identified some risks. Obviously, this is a period of transition, so for those that are already in services, it's really important that transition for their care management, their records, and also their treatment is ongoing. And we are doing a lot of work on a mobilisation programme with Turning Point and with other providers to transition that safely. And we will be piloting and trialling that care management system transition in February, so in a few weeks' time. We recognise that this is a high value and a high risk contract, and seeking to provide that safe and quality substance use services to a local population. And there is likely to be some media interest, so we're working with our partners in Bristol City Council's PR's teams to make sure that we're getting that right. So the recommendations that I'm bringing to the committee today is for the committee to note this report for information, setting out the new substance contract award to Turning Point for that to commence on the 1st of April.
Thank you, Julie. And just for the record, as you mentioned, the hyperlocal partnership, the Turning Point are now leading and coordinating the local partners, Bristol Drugs Project, Nelson Trust, 125, Southmead Development Trust, Southmead Project, the Wellspring Settlement, Hawke Springs, and Release. Right, two members have questions for Julie, and just to plead again, please keep the questions brief. Cara? And then Abdul.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. This has obviously been a huge contract to renegotiate, and I know that this has been absolutely months, if not years, in the coming. My question is really whether there are potentially some unintended consequences in the transitionary period. So, and I know we're saying that the potential closure of the AC unit is outside of Bristol's control, but is it possible that perhaps the lack of certainty about the future of the contract may have had an impact on AWP's certainty about beds in that unit, and there may have been maybe a breakdown in communication, which is perhaps leading to the loss of those beds? And I know we've already, in the earlier item, we've asked about if those beds are lost, will they be replaced and how will they be replaced? But will you also be looking into whether it could have been just a sort of a timing issue more than a funding issue, and from AWP's perspective in relation to Bristol?
Firstly, a number of questions within that, so I'll come back to me, Cara, if I've missed anything. What I will say is all of the current providers we meet with on a quarterly basis as part of our contract management. We're always looking at risks, we're looking at opportunities, we're looking at the quality of the services that have been delivered. And we've also have built in a whole exit strategy with each of those core providers. And we're working on a mobilisation programme at the moment, which has got many work streams. Absolutely critical is the service user and keeping their service delivery and their treatment on track. In regard to our engagement with our core current providers, we have maintained that throughout. And it is very difficult for us as a local provider, as a commissioner, to find that one of the services that we have commissioned is no longer going to be providing. And that's the work that we're doing again as part of our mobilisation. We have a very clear risk register, and we're looking to see, with Turning Points, how that can be mitigated through a range of different options.
Abdul next.
Yeah, so just two observations or 2 points on a single observation. Basically, we have a huge contract here, and this is something that I think all of us are passionate about, and you know, that we can see huge benefit in it. And I, sitting as a magistrate, I see you know, the daily kind of occurrences of people that are on some type of substance or misusing something that turn to crime, and then, you know, it spirals, and it's really difficult to break the cycle. But in trying to break that cycle, I think it's really important that we reach out to the most vulnerable communities, and those communities that we might sometimes see as potentially that they might not be a risk as well. And so with this kind of oversight, and you know, the people that we've chose to give the contracts through Roads, DH, BDP, AWP, I think it's really important that we also make them aware that there are other potential partners in delivery, and that there may be something that they're doing that could be more informed. How do we do that, and what is the opportunity for elected members to maybe try to inform that?
Oh, I'm still on. So obviously there's core partners that they've identified as part of their, when they proposed a bid, a tender, but there is a whole work around bringing Turning Point into Bristol that needs to be ongoing around the different partnerships, and obviously being very evidence and data led is really important. So part of what we're looking at with our intelligence is, where are the parts of our city, the communities within our city, where you would expect there to be high numbers of people accessing services that currently aren't, that inequality and inequity. And so we'll be tasking and working with our new provider around how to manage that and to reach into that. We've got our Combating Drugs Partnership, which is already well established. They will be a member of that as well. So again, there's some key partners that sit in those groups, including Councillor Williams as a member.
Right. Final brief question.
The budget is too extreme for a final question, but nonetheless, thank you very much for the presentation. I was looking at the impact assessment from the survey, and the data that was provided there is that there was 0% respondents from people from Black and ethnic minoritized communities. Now, again, obviously we've spoken about data and the lack of shift within elements of deprivation. So, and then we're looking at the diversity of the contract providers. And I think, as my colleague has mentioned, I think it's, as public health, it should be within hindsight to put people in the lead to be able to deliver the things that the communities need, and really cater for that within the contracts provision as a supply chain diversity just protocol. Because it is very clear that if the same things happen, there will be no change. And we particularly consistently thinking that organizations that have been around for longer or have got the internal expertise have got the reach. And it's pretty clear from here that they don't. So then how then could we then have that trust to say, if you get this, you'll all of a sudden develop the reach? I think, you know, we just have to think from a more inclusive lens about how we utilize our spend, and be in full intentionality in how we do that, especially around health, well-being. You know, these core indicators that you focus on the joint needs assessments, they are critical, and we can use our spend better to better change those trajectory. Now, the social value that's probably attached with this is my core question. What does that social value, when it goes through that procurement, going to look like, so that it actually provides tangible benefits to all the things that have been mentioned here under the public health remit? I previously had asked this question from the public health contract. There's quite a significant amount of spend, as mentioned by the chair earlier, that we need to better understand how we are utilizing the procurement spend within public health to better meet the needs
that we need to be able to address on an equalities assessment basis. Can you reassure us that this will be actually happening and taking place, regardless of where this contract is now, to better make sure that it actually does that?
Amongst the hyperlocal partners, are there, because I don't know the answer to this, are there any that have a particular expertise, community reach, along the lines that Sibs is asking about?
So yes, I mean, we have partners that are in South Bristol, for example, Hawke Springs. We have the Wellspring community. They're a key partner as well. So we have got some, as I said, hyper-local providers that do know the communities that they're based within and they're working with. I think the social value is really important, and all of our bids had to put in a social value proposal of what they were going to be delivering as an added value, and we will be contractually monitoring that that is therefore then delivered.
Okay, thank you, Julie. So this report has come to us again for noting, because it was a delegated authority to the Director of Public Health to award the contract. So we've had our discussion, and the report is therefore duly noted. So that brings this meeting to an end. It's been quite a marathon session, as in our private session we started at 9 o'clock. So thank you everyone for your patience and for your contributions today. Our next meeting is same time, same place on Friday, the 14th of March. So see you all then, and multiple points in between. Thank you.